The Duke's hand froze above his wineglass, the instant the maid lifted the silver tray, not because she had spilled a drop, not because she had spoken out of turn, but because the candlelight had caught the small ring on her finger, and for one terrible second, the grand dining room of Alder-mere Hall vanished from his sight. England, 1847, and every person at the long mahogany table believed His Grace Lord Gideon Harcourt, Duke of Alder-mere, to be a man beyond surprise. He had inherited too young, buried too many people before he understood what grief cost, and learned before manhood that a duke's face must never reveal what his heart had failed to survive. Yet that night, before 36 guests, beneath chandeliers trembling with flame and crystal, the Duke of Alder-mere went still. The maid did not notice at first. Marian Vale had trained herself not to notice gentlemen unless duty required it. A servant survived by seeing everything and appearing to see nothing. She moved along the left side of the table with the quiet precision Mrs. Sloane demanded from all women below stairs, though Marian was only a second parlour maid and should not have been serving wine at a formal dinner. A footman had taken ill. The first parlour maid had burned her wrist with a kettle. Mrs. Sloane had looked over the line of servants with the cold displeasure of a general reviewing damaged troops, then had fixed upon Marian. "You will go up," she had said. "You will keep your eyes lowered. You will not imagine yourself part of what you see." Marian had answered, "Yes, Mrs. Sloane," because she had learned years ago that silence could be armor when speech would only be used as a rope. Now she stood among silk gowns, black evening coats, white linen, polished silver, and the soft, dangerous laughter of people who had never once wondered whether a reference could decide the shape of a woman's life. Alder-mere Hall was made to humble anyone not born to it. Its dining room stretched nearly 50 feet from the carved double doors to the great marble fireplace, where the Harcourt crest glimmered above the mantel. Portraits of dead dukes watched from the panelled walls. Their painted eyes seemed to know who belonged beneath them and who did not. Marian belonged to the passages behind the baize doors, to the servants' stairs, to the linen cupboards, to the narrow room she shared with two maids who whispered in their sleep when winter winds shook the windows. She did not belong beneath ancestral faces. She knew that. Everyone knew that. Lady Honoria Harcourt knew it most of all. The Duke's widowed aunt sat at the far end of the table, with her spine so straight that the pearls at her throat barely moved when she breathed. She had been mistress in practice at Alder-mere for many years, not by title, but by habit, and habit was often stronger than law inside old houses. Her eyes followed Marian whenever the girl came too near the guests. A little warning lived in that look. Do not stumble, do not speak, do not become visible. Lady Octavia Mowbray sat beside her. Mother 2 places down from the Duke, beautiful in pale blue silk, her golden hair arranged with such care that even the candlelight seemed instructed to flatter her. She had laughed 3 times that evening, at remarks His Grace had not made for laughter. She had leaned toward him with practiced softness. Marian had seen all of it and thought nothing of it. Dukes married ladies like Lady Octavia. Maids carried trays past the table and disappeared. That was the world. It had rules. The rules were cruel, but they were rarely confused. Then Gideon Harcourt saw her ring. It was a plain thing, hardly worth the notice of a man who owned diamonds older than many families. A narrow silver band, worn thin at the edges, scratched along one side. Marian wore it beneath her glove when she could, but the glove on her right hand had split that morning, and Mrs. Sloane had not allowed her time to mend it. She had turned the ring inward toward her palm, hoping no one would see. But candlelight was a treacherous witness. As Marian reached to collect the Duke's empty glass, the ring flashed. His fingers stopped. His eyes lowered to her hand. The table continued breathing around them. A gentleman near the fireplace described a hunt in Leicestershire. Lady Octavia's mother murmured something about the coming season. Silver touched porcelain. Wine moved darkly in crystal. Yet the Duke did not move. Marian felt it then. Not his hand, not his breath, but the weight of his attention. It struck her more sharply than Mrs. Sloane's whispered corrections, more dangerously than Lady Honoria's watchfulness. She kept her gaze lowered, as she had been taught, but she could not prevent the small tightening of her fingers around the tray. "Your Grace?" the butler asked from behind the Duke's chair, his voice low enough to preserve the dinner's dignity. Gideon did not answer him. His eyes remained on Marian's ring. The line of his mouth had changed. Until that instant, it had been controlled, courteous, and remote. Now it looked as if some old wound had opened without permission. Marian drew the tray back by 1 inch. It was a mistake, a tiny motion, but Lady Honoria saw it. "Girl," she said, softly enough to sound civilized and sharply enough to cut. Conversation thinned around the table. Marian lowered her head further. "Yes, my lady. Have you forgotten how to serve his grace?" A few guests looked amused. A few looked away, which was worse. Pity from the well-born was often just cruelty with better manners. Marian felt heat rise under her collar, but her voice remained even. "No, my lady, Mrs." Sloane appeared near the sideboard, her black gown severe, her keys hanging at her waist like a warning. She had seen the pause. She had seen the Duke looking. Her face tightened with the particular anger of a woman who feared disorder more than injustice. "Your hand," Mrs. Sloane whispered as she passed behind Marian. "Turn it down." Marian obeyed. Too late. The Duke's chair scraped the floor, not loudly. He was not a man who needed noise to command a room. The slight sound was enough. Every conversation died at once. Lady Octavia's fan stopped mid-air. Lady Honoria's eyes narrowed. Marian stared at the white cloth, at the silver forks aligned with military precision, at the deep red wine, trembling in the glass nearest her hand. "What is your name?" the Duke asked. His voice was low. It should have relieved her that he did not sound angry. It did not. There was something worse in it. Recognition. Marian curtsied as well as one could while holding a tray. "Marian Vale, your grace." His face changed again, so briefly that only someone accustomed to watching powerful people from corners might have caught it. Disappointment. Confusion. Pain hidden almost quickly enough. "Marian," he repeated. The name seemed to mean nothing to him and too much at once. Lady Honoria gave a small laugh. "She is one of the lower maids, Gideon, Mrs. Sloane can answer any necessary question about staff." The Duke did not look at his aunt. "Where did you get that ring?" The dining room became so quiet that Marian heard a candle hiss. She could have lied. A servant often survived by offering the answer expected of her. "My mother left it to me. I found it years ago." "It is nothing, your grace." Instead, her thumb pressed against the inside of the band, touching the worn place where letters had nearly disappeared. A boy's shaking hand. A winter morning. A promise spoken with the solemn certainty only children and the dying ever possessed. She buried the memory before it could reach her face. "It was given to me, your grace." Lady Octavia tilted her head. "By whom?" The question came wrapped in sweetness, but Marian heard the hook inside it. A maid with a ring invited suspicion. A maid with a secret invited punishment. Marian kept her eyes lowered. "A long time ago, my lady." Mrs. Sloane stepped closer. "The girl should not have worn jewelry above stairs. I shall have it removed at once." She reached for Marian's hand. The Duke moved before Marian could flinch. He did not touch Mrs. Sloane. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned his head, and every servant in the room seemed to remember at once that a housekeeper's authority ended where a duke's began. "No," he said. Mrs. Sloane's hand stopped in the air. Lady Honoria's expression hardened. "Gideon, surely you do not mean to interrupt dinner over a maid's trinket." "It is not a trinket." The words left him too quickly. Marian felt the room shift. Curiosity sharpened. Guests looked from her hand to the Duke's face. She wished, suddenly and fiercely, to be back below stairs with sore feet and safe obscurity. She had spent years becoming forgettable. One ring had undone all of it. Lady Octavia lowered her fan, studying Marian with new interest. "How curious," she murmured. "A servant's ring that his grace recognizes." The sentence floated gently, poisonous as belladonna in a teacup. Marian's throat tightened, but she did not lift her head. She would not plead innocence before anyone had dared accuse her. The Duke looked at her as though the rest of the room had fallen away again. His eyes were grey, not cold now, but stricken. "Look at me," he said. It was not harsh. That made it harder to obey. Marian raised her eyes. The moment she did, something passed through his face that no duke should ever have shown before guests. He saw not a maid, perhaps, but a thin child in a charity dormitory, a girl with cold fingers and stubborn courage. Marian saw not the Duke of Alder-mere, but a feverish boy under a rough blanket, whispering that one day he would be powerful enough to keep every promise. His lips parted. No sound came. Lady Honoria rose half an inch from her chair. "This is improper." That word restored air to the room. Improper. It was always the word used when truth appeared in the wrong clothing. Marian stepped back. The tray trembled once, then stilled. She made herself breathe. She made herself remember who she was now. Not Mara. Never Mara. Marian Vale, second parlour maid, dependent upon wages, reverence, and restraint. The Duke seemed to hear a voice no one else could. His own hand lowered slowly to the table. "I said," he whispered, almost without breath, "I would marry you." The words were so quiet they should not have travelled, but silence carried them. Marian felt them strike the room. Lady Octavia went pale with offended disbelief. Mrs. Sloane stared as if the floor had opened. Lady Honoria's pearls shifted at last, one small movement against her throat. Marian could not move. The tray was still in her hands. The silver ring was still on her finger. And the most powerful man in Yorkshire was looking at her as though a promise made in childhood had just risen from the dead. For several seconds after the Duke spoke, no one at the table seemed willing to breathe first. Marian stood with the tray in both hands and felt every rank in England pressing upon her lowered shoulders. She had heard impossible things in grand houses before. Ladies promised affection while dismissing companions without references. Gentlemen praised charity while stepping past hungry children outside church gates. But no impossibility had ever sounded like the Duke of Alder-mere whispering a childhood vow across a formal dinner table while his guests stared at a maid. Lady Honoria recovered before anyone else. "Gideon," she said, in the tone one used for a cracked glass before it shattered entirely, "you are overtired." The Duke did not look at her. His gaze remained on Marian with such stunned intensity that she could almost feel the years between them being searched, room by room, like a locked house. "Mrs. Sloane," he said. The housekeeper stiffened. "Your Grace." "The dinner will proceed without this girl being touched, dismissed, searched, scolded, or spoken of in my absence." Mrs. Sloane's mouth tightened. "Of course, Your Grace." Lady Octavia's fan moved again slowly. "How dramatic for a household matter," she murmured, but softly enough that only those nearest could hear. Marian heard. She had trained herself to hear softness, because cruelty in houses like Alder-mere rarely needed to raise its voice. Gideon turned to the butler. "Mr. Anson, have Mrs. Vale wait in the housekeeper's room after service. The door will remain open. You will be present in the passage." A small stir passed through the table. Marian's fingers tightened around the tray. "Mrs. Vale." No one below stairs called her that with respect. Servants were surnames when corrected, and Christian names when commanded. From a duke's mouth, the formality sounded almost dangerous. "Your Grace," Lady Honoria said. "Colder now. Surely this can wait until morning." No. He picked up his wineglass at last, though he did not drink from it. "It has waited long enough." Dinner resumed in appearance only. Knives touched plates. Guests made careful remarks about the venison, the weather, the difficulty of keeping roads passable after autumn rain. Every word floated over the true subject, which was Marian's hand, Marian's ring, and the Duke's impossible face when he saw it. Marian completed the course by force of will. She carried plates. She poured wine. She stood beside the sideboard and kept her eyes fixed on what duty required, yet the ring seemed to burn against her skin. Once, when she looked up by accident, Gideon was watching her again. Not as a gentleman watched a pretty maid, not as an employer watched a servant. He looked at her as if she had returned from death, carrying a piece of his own childhood in her palm. By the time the ladies withdrew and the gentlemen remained over port, Marian's breath felt too shallow for her bodice. Mrs. Sloane found her in the passage outside the dining room and seized the tray from her hands. "You will say nothing unless asked," the housekeeper whispered. "You will not weep. You will not invent. You will not look at His Grace as though you have claims. Do you understand me?" Marian looked at the woman's keys, shining against black wool. "Yes, Mrs. Sloane. And that ring will come off before morning." Marian said nothing. Silence had saved her too often for her to abandon it in a corridor. The housekeeper's room stood behind the main service hall, respectable enough for accounts and discipline, plain enough to remind every servant that comfort belonged elsewhere. A lamp burned on the desk. Ledgers lay stacked beside a locked tea caddy. The door had been left open, and Mr. Anson stood in the passage beyond it, his silver hair and severe black coat making him look more like a church warden than a butler. He did not speak to Marian when she entered. He only inclined his head, just enough to acknowledge that she was present and not yet condemned. That small courtesy nearly undid her. She stood beside the chair but did not sit. A maid did not sit before a duke unless ordered. Gideon arrived without Lady Honoria, though the pressure of his aunt seemed to follow him like cold air. He had removed neither his evening coat nor his composure, but the control now looked deliberate rather than natural. He paused in the doorway when he saw Marian standing. "Sit down." Marian lowered her eyes. "I am accustomed to standing, Your Grace. I didn't ask what you're accustomed to." The words were quiet, not unkind. "Please sit." The word please unsettled her, more than command would have done. She sat at the edge of the chair. Gideon took the opposite seat, leaving the desk between them, as if he understood that distance could be a form of respect. Mr. Anson remained visible beyond the open door, proper, witnessed, safe in every way that society cared to measure safety. Gideon looked at her hand. "May I see it?" Marian knew what he meant. Her right hand curled once in her lap, then opened. She drew off the mended glove finger by finger and placed her hand on the desk. The silver band looked smaller under lamplight, almost poor. Gideon did not touch her. He bent closer, and for a moment the Duke vanished from his face. Something younger appeared there, a boy trying not to be afraid. "There are letters inside," he said. Marian's voice came out steady, only because she forced it through a narrow place in her throat. "They are nearly worn away." "GD," he said, "and M. Mr." Anson shifted in the passage but did not speak. Gideon lifted his eyes. "Who gave this to you?" Marian folded her hands again, hiding the ring from him and from herself. "A child. Where?" "I do not remember clearly, Your Grace." It was the first lie she had told him, and it tasted of ashes. His expression changed, not anger. Hurt, quickly mastered. "Do you remember?" Seemed to shrink. Marian saw iron bedsteads, grey blankets, a cracked wash basin. A slice of bread hidden beneath the pillow, because a feverish boy had been too proud to admit hunger. She heard rain striking high windows and a smaller voice than her own saying, "If I am ever grand, I will come back for you." She pressed her thumb into her palm until the memory retreated. "There are many charities in England, Your Grace. That isn't an answer. It is the only one I can give." He leaned back slowly. "I was not there under my own name. For 3 weeks after the carriage accident, before my guardians could secure the matter properly, I was hidden at St. Jude's as Gideon Dell. I was told later it was necessary. There were disputes over custody, inheritance, and who could be trusted. I remember fever. I remember cold. I remember a girl who gave me bread and told me not to die, because dying would be rude after she had gone to so much trouble." Marian's face almost broke. Almost. She looked down before he could see it. "That sounds like an impertinent child." She was. For the first time, a faint warmth touched his voice. It vanished quickly. She said her name was Mara. Marian's heart struck once, hard. A child's memory is not always reliable. Mine has been unreliable about many things. Not that. He paused. "Your name is Marian Vale." "Yes, Your Grace. Were you ever called Mara?" The question hung between them, small and devastating. Marian could have answered. The truth rose to her lips, with the force of something imprisoned too long. But truth was not always freedom. Sometimes truth was a door that opened into a room full of people waiting to take everything left. "No one calls me that now," she said. Gideon went very still. "That is not what I asked." Footsteps sounded in the passage. Mr. Anson straightened. Lady Honoria appeared at the open door without apology, dressed in black silk and pale pearls, her expression composed enough to make interruption look like duty. "This has gone far enough." Gideon did not rise. "Aunt." "Do not aunt me in that tone. You have a dining room full of guests, one of the most suitable young ladies in Yorkshire under your roof, and a servant girl sitting with you as though she were a governess giving counsel." Marian stood at once. Gideon's eyes moved to her, then back to Lady Honoria. "She will sit if I ask her to sit. You are inviting talk. Talk rarely needs an invitation." Lady Honoria's gaze settled on Marian. "Where did you obtain the ring?" Marian curtsied. "It was given to me, my lady." "So you have said. By whom?" Gideon's voice cut in before Marian could answer. "By me." The words fell cleanly. Lady Honoria's face did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "You were a grieving child." "I was a child," he said. "I was not a fool. You cannot know what became of every trinket you misplaced in distress. I know that ring. Then the girl should surrender it until the matter is understood." Marian felt the old lesson close around her. When the powerful were uncertain, the powerless paid a deposit. Gideon saw her hand withdraw into the folds of her apron. His voice lowered. "No one will take it from her tonight, Mrs." Sloane had appeared behind Lady Honoria, pale with contained fury. "Your Grace, if there is suspicion attached to a servant, the proper course would be dismissal pending reference." Gideon looked at the housekeeper then, and the temperature of the room seemed to fall. "There is no dismissal. But, Your Grace, there is no suspicion until I say there is suspicion." Mrs. Sloane lowered her eyes. "Yes, Your Grace." Lady Honoria stepped into the room, though she did not cross the threshold fully. "You risk your dignity for a maid's sentimental tale." "No," Gideon said. "I risk very little by asking for proof before punishment." Marian looked at him then, despite herself. It was not gratitude she felt. Gratitude was too simple. It was fear, because kindness from power could become another kind of chain. It was anger, because he remembered enough to disturb her life, but not enough to save it sooner. It was something softer too, and that was the most dangerous of all. Lady Honoria's voice turned smooth. "Very well, ask your questions. But when the answer proves ordinary, remember that Lady Octavia's family will not enjoy being made audience to servant theatricals." She left with Mrs. Sloane behind her. For a moment only the lamp flame moved. Gideon looked back at Marian. "I will write to St. Jude's tonight. Records can be wrong, so can people. People with titles are usually believed before records are read." He accepted the rebuke without flinching. "Then I will read carefully." Marian did not know what to do with that. She had expected command, accusation, perhaps pity. Careful attention felt more intimate than any of them. "Your Grace, whatever you remember, I am only a maid in your house." "No," he said, and there was that fracture in his composure again. "You are the woman wearing a ring I have not seen since I was a boy, and I intend to learn why." She curtsied because she needed something formal to stand behind. "May I return to my duties?" He looked as if he wished to say no, then understood what that would make of him. "Yes." Marian passed through the open door under Mr. Anson's quiet gaze. She walked the corridor without haste. She did not run until she reached the narrow turn beside the linen press, where no one from the dining room could see her. There, in the dimness smelling of soap, starch, and old wood, she pressed her hand to her mouth. Mara. No one had called her that in years. No one living should have remembered. But the Duke had remembered the bread, the fever, the ring, and the promise. Marian looked down at the silver band. For one breath, she let herself be the girl she had buried. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes before tears could form, and returned below stairs as Marian Vale. Behind her, in the housekeeper's room, Gideon Harcourt sat at the desk and wrote with a hand that did not shake until he reached the name St. Jude's. By morning, the ring had become a story with more versions than there were servants below stairs. In the scullery, a kitchen maid whispered that His Grace had once been promised to Marian in secret. In the laundry, a housemaid claimed Marian had stolen the ring from a locked jewel case and bewitched him by wearing it openly. By the servants' breakfast, the tale had grown teeth. Marian entered the long table room, with her cap pinned straight, her apron clean, and her right hand tucked beneath the fold of her left sleeve. No one greeted her. Spoons slowed in bowls. Eyes moved toward the ring, even when mouths pretended not to speak of it. She took her place near the end of the table, where second maids sat when they were not being corrected, and broke her bread into neat pieces because ordinary gestures could keep a woman from shaking. Mrs. Sloane stood by the door with her keys at her waist and triumph already arranged upon her face. "Miss Vale," she said, "the use of Miss made the room colder. Since you found time last night to become a topic of conversation among your betters, you will find time this morning to restore the South silver to a condition worthy of the house." A footman smirked into his tea. One of the younger maids looked down, ashamed of her own curiosity. Marian rose. "Yes, Mrs. Sloane, every candlestick, every serving dish, every spoon from the second cabinet, Mrs." Sloane's gaze dropped to Marian's hand. "And you will do so without displaying personal ornaments, like a peddler's wife at market." Marian folded her hands before her apron. "The ring does not interfere with my work. It interferes with humility." A few servants laughed, quickly and nervously. Marian felt the laughter land and pass through her. She had been laughed at before, at St. Jude's when her shoes split, in her first place when she used a word too fine for a maid, at Alder-mere when Mrs. Sloane discovered she could read more than labels on linen. Laughter was only sound unless one allowed it to become a verdict. "Then I shall work quietly," Marian said. Mrs. Sloane stepped closer. "Do not mistake His Grace's curiosity for protection. Gentlemen look at oddities. They do not keep them." Marian lifted her eyes then, not high enough to be insolent, but high enough to show she had heard. "I have never asked to be kept." The room went still, Mrs. Sloane's mouth thinned. Silver room now. Marian curtsied and left before anyone could see the heat at the back of her eyes. The silver room smelled of chalk, damp cloth, and cold metal. Its narrow window gave a pale view of the service yard, where delivery carts left tracks through the mud. Marian tied a rough apron over her uniform and set herself to work. Candlestick after candlestick, tray after tray. The paste dried white along her fingers. The ring scraped softly against the cloth each time she turned a handle or rubbed at a tarnished rim. She should have removed it. A sensible woman would have hidden it in her trunk until the Duke forgot, until Lady Honoria turned her attention elsewhere, until the house found a newer scandal to chew. But every time Marian thought of taking it off, she saw the boy under the grey blanket, his fever-bright eyes fierce with childish dignity. "When I'm grand, I'll come back," he had whispered. "I won't forget you." He had forgotten. Of course he had. Boys became dukes. Girls became whatever hunger and paperwork allowed. Still, the ring had remained. Not because she expected rescue. Not because she believed promises survived rank. Because once, before the world taught her the proper size of her life, someone had looked at her as if she mattered. By noon, her shoulders ached. By 3 o'clock, her fingertips were sore beneath the paste. Mrs. Sloane came in twice to inspect the work, and once to add a basket of dessert forks that had not been part of the original order. "His Grace dislikes tarnish," she said. "In silver or in staff?" Marian did not answer. Silence again, armor again. Near 4 o'clock, Lady Octavia entered the service passage, with her maid behind her, though no guest had reason to be in that part of the house. She wore a walking dress of dove-grey wool, trimmed with blue, as if even a corridor beneath stairs deserved the compliment of her beauty. Mrs. Sloane appeared at once and dropped a curtsy so low it nearly became devotion. "My lady, you should not trouble yourself down here." "I misplaced a glove," Lady Octavia said lightly. Her gaze found Marian. "Though perhaps I have found something more interesting." Marian stood beside the silver table, cloth in hand, My lady, Lady Octavia smiled. It was a lovely smile. That made it worse. You are the maid from dinner. Yes, my lady. The one his grace questioned. Marian said nothing. Lady Octavia moved closer, careful not to let her hem touch the floorboards. You must forgive the household's curiosity. When a duke interrupts dinner over a servant's ring, people do wonder whether the servant has encouraged him. Mrs. Sloane's eyes sharpened with pleasure. Marian kept her voice even. I did not encourage his grace to ask anything. No? How fortunate for you that he did. Lady Octavia looked at the ring as one might inspect a stain on fine lace. Some women are born with beauty, some with fortune, and some must make use of whatever little mystery falls into their hands. Marian felt the words enter the room and wait for her to bleed from them. She would not. I have made use of work, my lady, nothing else. Lady Octavia's smile hardened for one breath. Work is admirable when it remains in its place. She turned to Mrs. Sloane. Do not let me interrupt discipline. Then she left, taking the scent of violets and quiet malice with her. Mrs. Sloane waited until the footsteps faded. You see what you have done. I have polished silver, Mrs. Sloane. You have drawn the attention of a lady whose family could improve this house. I did not speak to Lady Octavia until she spoke to me. That is the trouble with girls like you. You believe innocence is protection. Mrs. Sloane reached for the ring. Marian drew her hand back. The movement was small. It changed everything. The housekeeper's face darkened. You forget yourself. Marian's heart beat hard, but her voice remained clear. No, I remember myself. I have never stolen bread, silver, or rank, Mrs. Sloane. I will not stand here and pretend guilt, because it is more convenient for you. The words had scarcely left her when a shadow shifted beyond the half-open silver room door. Mrs. Sloane did not see it. Marian did. A man stood in the service passage, where gentlemen never lingered unless they were lost or listening. Lord Gideon Harcourt was neither. He had removed his hat and gloves, and rain darkened the shoulders of his coat, as if he had come in through the side entrance rather than the main hall. His face was still but not empty. Marian knew at once that he had heard enough. Mrs. Sloane followed Marian's gaze and turned. The blood left her cheeks. Your Grace. Gideon stepped into the doorway. He did not look at Marian first. He looked at the table covered with silver, the raw state of Marian's hands, the baskets still waiting, and the housekeeper standing close enough to corner her. Is this Miss Vale's regular duty? Mrs. Sloane recovered with impressive speed. Temporary necessity, Your Grace. Standards must be maintained. For 8 hours? The girl required occupation after last night's disturbance. The disturbance was not caused by her. Mrs. Sloane lowered her eyes. I meant no criticism of Your Grace's judgment. Then be more precise. The words were quiet. The room seemed to contract around them. Gideon entered fully and picked up one of the candlesticks Marian had polished. It shone perfectly. He set it down with care. Mr. Anson will oversee Miss Vale's assignments until further notice. Mrs. Sloane looked up. Your Grace, that would be irregular. So is punishing a servant for being questioned by her employer. I assure you, Your Grace, there was no punishment. Gideon's eyes moved to Marian's hands. She folded them at once, ashamed without knowing why. Miss Vale, he said, were you ordered to complete all of this today? Mrs. Sloane inhaled. Marian understood the trap. If she spoke, she would be accused of complaint. If she denied it, she would surrender the truth. Gideon waited. He did not rescue her from the choice. He gave it to her. Marian lifted her chin by the smallest measure. Yes, Your Grace. Mrs. Sloane's keys clinked once at her waist. Gideon nodded. You will stop now. There are still 2 trays unfinished. They will remain unfinished. Mrs. Sloane's composure cracked. Your Grace, if servants are allowed to decide when work is complete, order itself will suffer. Order is not cruelty with a ledger. Silence struck the silver room. Marian looked down, not because she was ashamed, but because the sudden force of being believed was too much to meet directly. Gideon turned to Mrs. Sloane. You will not instruct anyone in this house to touch Miss Vale's ring. You will not speak of theft without evidence. You will not use my name to frighten her. Yes, Your Grace, and Mrs. Sloane. The housekeeper paused at the door. If I learn that any servant has been encouraged to repeat gossip about her, I will consider the source, not the echo. Mrs. Sloane curtsied and left. Stiff with humiliation, Marian remained beside the table, the cloth still in her hand. Gideon did not come closer. That restraint unsettled her more than approach might have done. You should have told me, he said. A maid who tells tales against a housekeeper soon becomes a maid without a place. Not while I am master here. Marian almost smiled. Almost. Your Grace, houses remember the commands of dukes. They also remember the resentment of everyone beneath them. He accepted that, as he had accepted her rebuke the night before. Then I will be careful. Careful may not be enough. No, he said. But it is where I can begin. For a moment, the silver room held no rank, except the painful distance between the man who could change lives by speaking and the woman who had survived by making sure. No one spoke of her at all. Gideon's gaze lowered to the ring. St. Jude's has not answered. Marian's fingers closed. Perhaps there is nothing to answer. There is. I remember the name Mara. The old name passed through her like a draught under a locked door. She turned back to the table and placed the cloth beside the unfinished tray. Then perhaps Your Grace remembers a ghost. His voice softened. Ghosts don't polish silver until their hands ache. Marian looked at him, despite herself. The remark should have been absurd. Instead, it made something warm and unwelcome rise behind her ribs. She curtsied before it could reach her face. May I return below stairs? Yes, to rest. That last word was not a request. It was protection. It was also dangerous. Marian walked past him into the passage, aware of his stillness as one might be aware of a fire behind a closed grate. At the turn, she heard him speak to Mr. Anson, who had appeared from the far corridor. Find out who first called her the charity girl. Mr. Anson answered, Yes, Your Grace. Gideon's voice lowered. And send another letter to St. Jude's. This time, ask why a girl named Mara vanished from their records. Marian stopped where neither man could see her. The service passage blurred for one breath. Then she went on, carrying her secret upright, while behind her the Duke began searching for the place where her life had been deliberately erased. The first answer from St. Jude's arrived 3 days later, and Gideon knew before he broke the seal that someone had written it with the careful uselessness of a person paid to remember nothing. The letter was waiting on the silver tray beside his breakfast, folded neatly beneath 2 invitations, one note from Lady Octavia's mother, and a small card from Lady Honoria, reminding him that the Mowbrays expected a drive through the North Park that afternoon. He ignored all of them. The seal of the charity was pressed into dull red wax, worn at the edges, the sort of seal that had passed through too many clerks and too little mercy. He opened it with a paper knife and read while rain tapped against the tall windows of the breakfast room. The current secretary of St. Jude's regretted that records from the winter of 1829 had suffered damage from damp and improper storage. He regretted that no full list of children resident during the relevant months could be supplied. He regretted that no girl called Mara appeared in the surviving index. He regretted a great deal, Gideon thought, for a man who had revealed almost nothing. At the bottom, in a cramped postscript, a less polished hand had added that certain old donation books and chapel copies might have been transferred years earlier to Alder-mere, owing to the late Duchess's patronage. Gideon read that line twice. Then he rose so abruptly that the footman by the sideboard stepped back. Have Mr. Anson meet me in the chapel vestry, he said, and tell no one else. By 10 o'clock, the estate chapel smelled of rain, cold stone, old prayer books, and beeswax. It stood no more than 80 yards from the east wing of Alder-mere Hall, small beside the vast house, but older in spirit than all its marble corridors. Gideon had attended services there as a boy, after he was returned to the world that called him heir. He remembered sitting beneath the Harcourt memorials, polished and combed and dressed in black, while everyone praised his composure. No one had asked why he flinched at bells, why he hid bread in his pocket, or why he woke calling for someone. No one in the house seemed to know. Anson unlocked the vestry cabinet with the same grave precision with which he managed dinner service. "These have not been touched in some years, Your Grace. My mother's charity papers, some of them. Her Grace was particular about St. Jude's." Lady Honoria later considered the connection impractical. That single sentence was careful, but Gideon heard the warning inside it. Lady Honoria had considered many humane things impractical. The butler placed a stack of ledgers and tied letters upon the small vestry table. Gideon began with the donation books. Names, sums, dates, coal deliveries, blankets, bread accounts, payments for boots. His mother's handwriting appeared in notes along the margins, precise and elegant. Increase winter allotment. Send flannel. Ask whether the small girl with the cough improved. He turned pages faster. A memory moved beneath his skin. Grey morning. A cracked mug. A girl pushing half her bread into his hand and scolding him in a whisper because he had tried to refuse it. He found the winter account at last. January 1829. St. Jude's temporary shelter expenses. Extra physician fee. Coal allotment increased. Then one line written not by his mother but by a clerk. Boy entered under name Gideon Dell. No surname inquiry to be made until further instruction. Gideon stopped breathing for one measured second. There it was. Proof that he had not invented the common name. Proof that his guardians had hidden him there, in those weeks after the carriage. Accident, when custody and control of the estate had been disputed by relatives who smiled in public and calculated in private. He turned the page. The next sheet should have listed the children resident in the girls' dormitory. It had been removed, not torn by accident, cut. A thin strip remained near the binding, clean and deliberate. Mr. Anson leaned closer. "That was not damp, Your Grace." "No." Gideon touched the cut edge with one finger. Someone wanted a page. The door from the chapel opened behind them. Both men turned. Marian stood just inside the threshold, with a folded linen cloth over her arm and a small basket at her hip. Her cap was plain, her dress dark, her posture properly lowered. Yet the moment her eyes saw the ledgers on the table, all her training failed for half a heartbeat. She looked like a woman who had seen her own grave opened. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said. "I was sent for altar linen." Mr. Anson glanced at Gideon, waiting for dismissal. Gideon did not give it. "Come in, Miss Vale." Marian stepped only as far as duty required. She placed the basket near the cabinet and kept her hands folded, though Gideon saw her gaze return to the cut page again and again. He lifted the ledger slightly. "Can you read this hand?" It was an improper question to ask a parlour maid in front of a butler, and he knew it. Marian knew it too. Her eyes moved to Mr. Anson. The butler looked politely at the rain-dark window, granting what privacy propriety allowed. Marian approached the table. Her finger did not touch the paper. "It says Reverend Thomas Vale, correspondence pending." Gideon looked up sharply. Vale. Her face had gone very still. "It is a common enough name. Is it? Common enough for those who need it to be?" The answer was too swift, too practiced. Gideon watched her as she read the next faint notation near the margin. "Child to be transferred after Candlemas. Instruction from H.H." Her voice changed on the initials, only slightly. But Gideon heard it. "Do those letters mean something to you?" he asked. Marian stepped back. "They may mean many things." "Marian." The name came out softer than he intended. She looked at him then, and for one dangerous instant he almost said Mara. He stopped himself. She had warned him with every silence that memory did not give him rights. Before either could speak again, the vestry door opened wider, and Lady Honoria entered with the pale calm of a woman who had never believed doors were meant to keep her out. "How touching," she said. The Duke conducting chapel business with a maid over his mother's papers. Marian dropped a curtsy at once. "My lady." Lady Honoria did not acknowledge it. Her gaze fell on the open ledger, then on Marian's face. "Can the girl read those?" Gideon closed the ledger halfway. Miss Vale was identifying a name. Was she? How very accomplished for the servants' hall. Marian's hands folded more tightly. Gideon saw the tendons whiten. Lady Honoria moved nearer the table. a maid who reads family records, wears an old ring, and appears wherever private papers are opened. One might call it coincidence if one had a generous imagination. One might call it obedience if one knew she was sent for linen, Gideon said. By whom? By whomever manages the chapel stores, Mrs. Sloane would never send a second parlour maid into the vestry without reason. Then we agree there was a reason. Lady Honoria's eyes sharpened. Do not fence with me, Gideon. It does not become you, nor does accusing servants without evidence become this house. The chapel seemed to gather the words and hold them under its low stone roof. Marian had gone pale, but she did not shrink. Lady Honoria turned to her. Who taught you to read that hand? Marian's mouth opened, then closed. Gideon expected evasion. Instead, she lifted her chin. My father taught me letters, my lady. Your father, yes, my lady. And what was he? A clerk? A shopkeeper? A small silence. A clergyman. Gideon felt the answer strike some hidden place in the ledger, in the note, in the name Thomas Vale. Lady Honoria's face hardened so swiftly that most people would have missed it. Many girls in service embroider their origins. Marian's voice did not break. Some have their origins taken from them. It was the bravest sentence Gideon had heard all week. Lady Honoria stepped toward her. You forget yourself. Gideon rose. No, she remembers too much. That appears to be the difficulty. Lady Honoria looked at him then, and the aunt who had instructed his childhood posture, corrected his mourning gloves, and decided which visitors were suitable after his parents died, seemed to vanish. In her place stood someone older, colder, and afraid. Send her away, she said. Now. No. You will regret indulging this. I have regretted many things, Gideon said. Asking questions will not be one of them, Mr. Anson cleared his throat gently from near the cabinet. He held a smaller packet tied in faded blue ribbon. Your Grace? Gideon took it. The ribbon crumbled slightly when touched. Inside lay 2 chapel copy sheets and a half letter in his mother's hand. The letter mentioned blankets for St. Jude's, the boy hidden under Dell, and a girl whose full name was not yet confirmed. On the chapel copy, written in a cramped clerical hand, appeared the words Marian Vale, possible child of Reverend Thomas Vale, awaiting placement. Beneath it, another notation had been scratched through so heavily that only one word remained visible. Mara. Marian stared at it. The color left her face. Gideon did not reach for her. He wanted to. Instead, he moved the chair back with his foot. Sit. This time, she did not argue. Lady Honoria's voice sliced through the quiet. Old papers prove nothing except the unreliability of charity officers. At that moment, a young footman appeared in the chapel doorway, breathless from haste, but terrified of showing it. He bowed. Your Grace, a messenger from the village. A second letter from St. Jude's. Mr. Anson took it and passed it to Gideon. The seal had been poorly set. The paper was cheaper than the first. Gideon broke it open. This letter was shorter, less polished, less safe. The writer stated that although the central records for 1829 were damaged, one former matron, Mrs. Elspeth Carden, might recall the winter in question. She had retired to Belwick Parish, about 30 miles south by road. Gideon read the name aloud. Marian's hand went to the ring before she seemed aware of moving. Lady Honoria saw it. So did Gideon. The silence afterward was not empty. It was full of doors opening. Belwick, Marian whispered. Lady Honoria turned on her. You know the place? Marian lowered her hand slowly. When she answered, her voice was quiet, but it no longer sounded obedient. No, my lady. Then she looked at Gideon, and the truth she did not speak stood between them as plainly as the cut page on the table. Gideon folded the letter and placed it inside his coat. Then I shall know it soon enough. Marian's eyes held his for one breath, frightened and steady at once. Somewhere in the house beyond the chapel, ordinary life continued. Bells rang. Doors closed. Servants crossed passages with trays and linens. But in the vestry, beside his mother's papers and the mutilated ledger, Gideon understood that Marian Vale had not wandered accidentally into his past. Someone had removed her from it. And someone was still afraid she would be found. By the following afternoon, Lady Octavia Mowbray had ceased behaving like a guest. and begun behaving like an announcement. Her mother's carriage arrived from the village road just after luncheon, lacquered black and trimmed with the Mowbray crest, bringing 2 ladies' maids, 3 trunks, and enough expectation to alter the temperature of Alder-mere Hall. Marian watched from the upper landing with a folded stack of towels in her arms, while Lady Honoria received the Countess of Mowbray in the entrance hall below. The 2 women kissed the air beside each other's cheeks, with the solemn affection of generals, forming an alliance. Lady Octavia stood between them in a gown of pale green silk, smiling as if the house had already agreed to belong to her. "My dear Honoria," the Countess said, her voice rising beautifully beneath the carved ceiling, "you are kindness itself to extend our visit." Octavia has so looked forward to knowing Alder-mere in a quieter family way. A quieter family way. Marian heard the phrase and understood it at once. House parties had meanings. Extended visits had meanings. A young lady and her mother did not remain beneath a duke's roof for sentiment. They remained because society was expected to draw conclusions. Lady Honoria glanced toward Gideon, who had come from the library at the sound of arrivals. "His Grace has been much distracted by estate matters," she said. "A little suitable company will do him good." Gideon's face betrayed nothing. "Lady Mowbray," he said with a formal bow, "you are welcome at Alder-mere." Lady Octavia lowered her lashes. "We hope not to be in your way, Your Grace." "That would be difficult in a house of this size." The answer was courteous, but not warm. Lady Honoria's fingers tightened around the head of her cane. Marian should have gone on with the towels. Instead, she remained 1 second too long. Lady Octavia looked up. Their eyes met across the open height of the hall. The smile on the lady's face did not change, but its meaning did. Marian lowered her gaze and moved away before Mrs. Sloane could find an excuse to rebuke her. By 4 o'clock, the servants' hall knew that Lady Octavia's trunks had been carried into the blue suite, the rooms traditionally given to women of consequence. By 5 o'clock, it knew that Lady Honoria had ordered the best porcelain for tea. By 6 o'clock, it knew that Mrs. Sloane had warned every maid that any unpleasantness involving Miss Vale would reflect upon the entire household. "Which means," whispered Bess, one of the younger housemaids, while folding napkins beside Marian, "that if Lady Octavia drops her glove, you'll be blamed for placing the floor beneath it." Marian gave her a look, but Bess's attempt at humor had kindness in it. "Then I shall avoid floors," Marian said. Bess almost smiled. It vanished when Mrs. Sloane entered. Miss Vale, the housekeeper, said, "Lady Octavia requires fresh towels in the blue suite. You will take them. You will not linger. You will not converse. You will not give anyone cause to remember your face." Marian picked up the towels she had just folded. "Yes, Mrs. Sloane." The blue suite faced west over the park, where late light lay across the lawns like spilled honey. Marian knocked, waited, and entered when Lady Octavia's maid opened the door. Lady Octavia stood before the looking-glass without her gloves, fastening a bracelet at her wrist. Her beauty was not gentle up close. It had edges. "Leave us, Ellis," she said. The maid hesitated, then curtsied and slipped into the adjoining dressing room. Marian placed the towels on the linen stand. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" "Yes." Lady Octavia turned. "Shut the door." Marian did not move at once. Lady Octavia's brows lifted. "You do know how doors work, don't you?" Marian shut it, though not fully. She left it open by the width of 2 fingers, a habit learned in houses where a maid's word was never strong enough to stand alone. Lady Octavia noticed. Cautious. "How interesting. A servant must be careful, my lady. A servant must be obedient." Lady Octavia crossed to a small writing table and lifted a folded paper. "Let us not dislike each other unnecessarily. I understand more than you may suppose. You have had a startling few days. His Grace noticed you. That would dazzle many women in your position." Marian kept her hands folded. "I am not dazzled, my lady." "No? Then you are either wiser than you look, or more ambitious." Lady Octavia placed the paper on the table between them. It was not a letter. It was a banknote, folded once. Marian looked at it only long enough to know what it was. "That is for you." Lady Octavia said. Enough to take a respectable place elsewhere, if your reference is managed gently. Perhaps with an elderly lady who needs a companion more than a maid. That would suit a girl who reads chapel records. Marian's pulse quickened, but her face stayed calm. You are generous. I am practical. Then you will not be offended when I decline. The lady's smile faded for the first time. Do not be foolish. You are not being offered an insult. You are being offered rescue. Rescue does not usually ask a woman to abandon her own name. Lady Octavia's eyes sharpened. What name is that, Marian Vale? Mara? Or whatever else you think will hold His Grace's attention. Marian felt the old childhood name strike the air between them. Lady Octavia knew it, which meant Lady Honoria had spoken. My name is not your concern, my lady. Everything beneath this roof is my concern if I am to become its mistress. The words were spoken softly, but they rang louder than a shout. Marian stood very still. Has His Grace announced that honor? Men of his rank do not always need to announce what everyone understands. Then I am sure everyone will be relieved when His Grace understands it too. Lady Octavia stared at her. A lesser cruelty would have raised its voice. Lady Octavia lowered hers. You have courage, I almost admire it. But courage in a maid is like a candle in a draught. One breath from the right person, and it is gone. Marian curtsied. May I return to my duties? Lady Octavia lifted the banknote and held it out. Take it. Leave before you are made to leave with nothing. Marian looked at the note, then at the lady's smooth hand. There had been years when money like that would have meant dry shoes, a private room, books not borrowed in secret, bread without accounting for every slice. For one heartbeat, temptation was not greed, it was exhaustion. Then she thought of the cut page in the ledger, and the word Mara scratched almost out of existence. She thought of Mrs. Sloane's keys, Lady Honoria's cool stare, and Gideon's voice saying that proof must come before punishment. Marian placed both hands at her sides. The silver ring gleamed faintly. I have been poor for a long time, my lady. Poverty is uncomfortable, but it has never taught me to sell the truth. Lady Octavia's hand closed over the note. Truth? Yes, my lady. A convenient word for a servant wearing a dead duchess's ring. The room seemed to still. Marian understood then. Not all of it, but enough. Lady Octavia had not merely been told of the ring. She had been told what wound to press. I do not know what you mean, Marian said. Do you not? Lady Octavia moved toward the door. His Grace's mother owned a silver ring in youth. Lady Honoria remembers it quite clearly. A family trinket. Sentimental, perhaps. Missing after a difficult season. And now it appears on your finger. Marian's mouth went dry. It was given to me by a boy. So you say. So His Grace remembers. His Grace remembers fever, grief, and childhood confusion. Those are not witnesses. They are weaknesses. Marian drew in one slow breath. You should not call his grief weakness. For a moment, the polished lady vanished, and something jealous looked out through Lady Octavia's eyes. How touching. The maid defends the Duke. She opened the door fully. You may go. Marian stepped into the corridor. She had taken no more than 3 paces, when Lady Octavia's voice followed her, light and clear enough for the maid in the dressing room to hear. Miss Vale. Marian turned. Yes, my lady. If you are innocent, you will not object when the ring is examined. Marian did not answer. She could feel the trap closing, not with iron, but with silk. Downstairs, the household bell rang for the drawing room, and Marian was sent with the tea tray because Mrs. Sloane's malice had become subtle again. The drawing room held Lady Honoria, Lady Mowbray, Lady Octavia, 2 visiting neighbours, and Gideon by the mantel. He looked up when Marian entered. She did not meet his eyes. If she did, she feared he would see the banknote, the threat, the ring's new danger, and the part of her that had nearly wanted to run. Lady Octavia noticed the avoided glance. How steady Miss Vale is, she said as Marian poured tea. One would think nothing in the world troubled her. Lady Honoria set down her cup. Good servants are trained not to display feeling. And yet, Lady Octavia continued, one wonders whether concealment is always discipline. Gideon's attention moved from Octavia to Marian. Meaning, Lady Octavia gave a small, embarrassed laugh, the kind designed to make cruelty appear reluctant. Nothing, Your Grace. Only that Miss Vale wears a ring of unusual interest. I confess I am curious whether it has been properly identified. Lady Honoria's gaze sharpened in satisfaction. A sensible point. Marian kept pouring. The tea did not tremble. That was something. The matter is being handled, Gideon said. By whom? Lady Octavia asked. By me. Then surely Miss Vale cannot object to surrendering it for inspection. A servant anxious to protect her reputation would welcome clarity. The room waited. Marian felt each second press upon her hand. Mrs. Sloane stood near the door, watching with thinly veiled hunger. Lady Honoria's face was calm. Lady Octavia's was sweet. Gideon's was unreadable, and that frightened Marian most. Miss Vale, Gideon said quietly. She looked at him then. His eyes held a warning, but not suspicion. You are not required to surrender anything in a drawing room. Lady Octavia's cheeks colored. Your Grace, I didn't suggest spectacle. No. You suggested pressure. Lady Mowbray gave a shocked little sound. Lady Honoria's cane tapped once against the floor. Gideon continued, still quiet. If the ring is to be examined, it will be examined with Miss Vale's consent, and in proper privacy. It will not be removed from her hand to satisfy curiosity. Marian had not expected rescue to feel painful, yet it did, because every defense from him made the room hate her more. She curtsied with the tea tray in her hands. Thank you, Your Grace. There is no need to thank me for refusing discourtesy. Lady Octavia smiled again, but this time Marian saw the strain beneath it. Of course. How noble. After tea, Marian was dismissed. She had nearly reached the corridor when she heard Lady Octavia's voice behind the half-closed drawing-room door, soft and venomous beneath the murmur of others. If she will not remove the ring, Lady Honoria, then we must make the ring condemn her. Marian stopped only long enough to understand that she had been right. The trap had not failed. It had merely changed shape. Then she walked on, carrying the empty tray with both hands, while behind her, in the drawing-room of Alder-mere Hall, two ladies began deciding how to turn a childhood promise into a crime. The next morning, Marian was sent to the chapel with a basket of fresh linen, and by the time she reached the east door, she understood that the errand had not come from Mrs. Sloane. Mr. Anson waited. Beneath the old yew tree in his black coat, his silver hair bright in the thin morning light, and beyond him, where the apple walk curved along the chapel wall, stood the Duke of Alder-mere. Gideon did not approach when she appeared. That restraint told Marian more than urgency would have done. He had arranged the meeting carefully enough to preserve every rule that mattered to reputation. The chapel door stood open. Mr. Anson remained visible at a distance of perhaps 20 yards. The morning was clear, cool, and bright after the rain, with drops still clinging to the apple leaves and the grass dark beneath the trees. It was almost peaceful. That made Marian cautious. Peace, in great houses, could be only the hush before someone chose where to place the blame. She curtsied with the basket on her arm. Your Grace, Miss Vale. His voice was formal, but his eyes were not. They had not been formal since the night he saw the ring. Thank you for coming. I was instructed to bring linen to the chapel. Yes. He glanced toward Mr. Anson. I gave the instruction. It seemed better than sending for you like a defendant. Marian looked toward the open chapel door. A defendant may at least know the charge. There is no charge. Not from you, perhaps. Gideon accepted the correction with a small lowering of his gaze. No. Not from me. She should have ended the conversation there, placed the linen inside, and returned below stairs before Mrs. Sloane invented some new offense. Instead, she stood still beneath the apple branches, because his face held a question he had not yet dared to ask, and because some part of her was tired of fleeing a memory that had already found her. Gideon moved one step along the path, not toward her, but beside her, so they might walk without appearing hidden. I received another note before breakfast, Mrs. Elspeth Carden is alive in Belwick. She was matron at St. Jude's during the winter I was there. Marian's fingers tightened on the basket handle. Then she may tell you what you wish to know. What I wish to know may not be what you wish to tell. That has rarely prevented questions from being asked. The faintest pain crossed his face. You are right. They walked slowly under the trees. The apples were small and green, not yet fit to pick. A few had fallen early and lay bruised in the grass. Marian kept her gaze on the path. Gideon kept the space between them proper, but she felt his attention as surely as if he had touched her sleeve. I remember pieces, he said. Not enough. Never enough. For years I thought grief had mixed things together. A charity dormitory, a grey blanket, a girl with dark hair cut badly at the ends because someone had done it with kitchen shears. She told me I was proud for a boy who did not know where his next bowl of broth was coming from. Marian almost stumbled. The memory came so sharply that the apple walk vanished. She saw him again as he had been, thin-faced and furious, trying to sit upright, though fever made his hands shake. She had been 12. He had been a little older, or perhaps only better at pretending. He had refused broth until she called him rude. He had eaten after that, glaring at her with all the dignity of a dethroned prince. It sounds as if she lacked manners, Marian said. She had courage instead. Children are often bold when no one important is listening. She was important to me. Marian stopped walking. The words were simple. They struck too deep. Gideon stopped too, still leaving distance. I did not remember her name properly for years. Mara. That was what I called her. Perhaps it was not what others called her. Perhaps it was only what she permitted me to use. Marian looked at the chapel wall, where ivy clung to stone older than anyone who now argued over rank within the house. Names change when people decide they own you. Gideon's voice softened. Who decided that? She did not answer. He did not press at once. That, too, unsettled her. Most powerful people believed patience was a gift they bestowed when obedience was delayed. Gideon's patience felt more like discipline against himself. I remember giving her the ring, he said. It was my mother's, though I scarcely understood that then. I had hidden it in my pocket after the accident. I think I believed, if I kept something of hers, she could not be entirely gone. Then I became ill. Mara sat beside me when the nurses were busy. She put the ring on a string and tied it around my wrist so I would not lose it. When they came to take me away, I gave it to her. Marian's thumb moved against the band before she could stop it. Why? Because she was crying and pretending not to. Marian looked down. That is not a reason to give away a duchess's ring. I was not a duke in that moment. I was a boy being taken from the only person who had told me the truth. He drew a breath. I told her I would come back. She said I would forget because gentlemen always did. I told her I would not. I said when I was grown, I would marry her. The apple leaves stirred above them. Somewhere near the chapel, Mr. Anson shifted but did not look their way. Marian felt the old promise unfold between them, foolish and sacred, childish and unbearable. She had lived years with that sentence locked inside her like a candle in a cupboard. It had warmed nothing. It had only proved the dark existed. Children say many impossible things, she said. Yes, Gideon's answer was immediate. They do. A grown man should not use a child's vow as a chain. She looked at him then. Do you understand that? I am beginning to. A duke cannot marry a maid because he feels guilty. The words left her more sharply than she intended. He cannot repair the past by placing a coronet on it. He cannot turn a servant into a wife, because a feverish boy once promised not to forget. That would not be honor. It would be another form of pity. Gideon grew very still. For a moment she feared she had gone too far. Then he bowed his head slightly, not as a duke acknowledging insolence, but as a man accepting truth. You have thought of this. Marian nearly laughed, but there was no humor in it. A maid who wears a ring she cannot explain has time to think. And what did the ring mean to you? She could have lied again. She was tired of lying. It meant that once, before I belonged to service bells and references, someone chose me, not as useful, not as obedient, not as convenient, chose me. I knew it was a child's fancy. I knew no carriage would come. I knew you had gone back to whatever life waited for you. But when I had no family left and no one spoke my name as if it mattered, I had the ring. Gideon's face altered with a sorrow so open that Marian looked away. She did not want his sorrow. It tempted the weak places in her. "I am sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry for surviving." The contraction came from her before she could soften it. "You were a child too." "I survived into power," he said. "You survived into service. That is not your crime." "No. But if someone connected to my house helped put you there, it becomes my duty to know." Duty. The word was safe. Safer than tenderness. Marian resumed walking because standing still felt too intimate. "There was a woman," she said. The admission was so quiet that he stepped once closer before remembering himself and stopping. "At St. Jude's?" "Yes, Lady Honoria." Marian closed her eyes briefly. The picture was old, blurred at the edges, but some details had never faded. Black silk, a veil pinned low, a scent of lavender and cold air, a gloved hand lifting her chin as if inspecting fruit. "I did not know her name. I called her the Lady in Black because of her veil." She spoke to Mrs. Carden in the office. "I heard my name, not Marian Mara, then Reverend Vale's name, then yours." Gideon's voice tightened. "Mine?" She said the boy was gone where he belonged, and the girl must be placed where she would not become troublesome. Gideon turned his face toward the chapel, and Marian saw the struggle in his jaw. Anger, controlled because she had given him a memory, and he would not reward it with a display that frightened her. "What happened after?" "I was told I had been fortunate. A place had been found. Work was honorable. Gratitude was expected. The ring was called childish nonsense, so I hid it. Later, when anyone asked where I had come from, the answer changed depending on who was asking. And your father," she swallowed. "Dead by then, I was told. A clergyman who left debts, perhaps true. Perhaps convenient I was a child. Papers decided more than I did." Gideon's eyes returned to her hand. "May I?" he asked. Marian knew what he meant. This time, the question did not feel like a demand in gloves. She held out her right hand, palm slightly turned, the ring catching morning light. Gideon touched the band with one finger. Not her skin, only the silver. The contact lasted no more than a heartbeat. Still, the air changed. "I will find the truth," he said. "I won't force you to stand before anyone before you're ready. You may not like the truth when you find it. I have liked too many lies already." She drew her hand back slowly. The place where his finger had touched the ring felt strangely warm. "Your Grace." "Gideon," he said, then seemed to realize the impropriety of it. "Forgive me." Marian looked toward Mr. Anson, who remained at his post as if made of discretion. Then she looked back at the man before her, the Duke who was not the boy, and yet had carried the boy into this morning. "I was Mara once," she said. The words left her softly. They seemed to settle among the apple trees, more confession than answer. Gideon did not smile. He did not claim triumph. His eyes only closed for one brief moment, as if a locked room inside him had opened, and he feared what lay there. When he looked at her again, there was no pity in his face. That frightened her most. Pity she could refuse. Recognition was harder. From the direction of the house, a bell rang for service. Marian stepped back, gathering the basket against her side. The world returned at once. Leanan Bell's duty, Lady Honoria's eyes, Lady Octavia's smile. "I must go," she said. "Yes." Gideon did not stop her. "Marian." She paused. "The woman in black. If it was my aunt, I will not ask you to bear that truth alone." Marian's throat tightened. "It is never the truth alone that destroys people, Your Grace. It is who is allowed to deny it." Then she walked toward the chapel door with the linen basket on her arm, leaving him beneath the apple trees. Behind her, Gideon stood very still, and for the first time since the ring had reappeared, Marian allowed herself to be afraid not that he would forget her again, but that he would remember too much, and be forced to choose between her truth and his own. Blood. By the evening of Lady Octavia's private smile, Alder-mere Hall had dressed itself for judgment. The dining room glowed with candlelight. The long table was laid with the best silver, and every guest seemed to understand that the meal was not truly arranged for food. Lady Honoria had invited the neighboring Ashbourne sisters, Sir Peregrine Valehurst from the next estate, and the vicar with his wife, all under the harmless explanation that Lady Mowbray and Lady Octavia should be shown local courtesy during their extended stay. Gideon understood the arrangement the moment he entered. Witnesses, not friends, not neighbors. Witnesses chosen for discretion, rank, and usefulness. His gaze moved first to his aunt, then to Lady Octavia, whose pale rose gown made her look soft enough to be innocent of strategy. Marian saw less but felt more. She stood behind the screen near the sideboard with the other servants, waiting for Mr. Anson's signal, and the ring beneath her glove seemed heavier than silver had any right to be. Mrs. Sloane had inspected her hands before service. "No visible ornament tonight," she had whispered. "If His Grace wishes to make a spectacle of charity girls, I will not assist him." Marian had warned her. Mended glove anyway, split seam and all, because hiding the ring entirely felt like agreeing it was shameful. When Mr. Anson nodded, she stepped forward with the first wine tray. She kept her eyes lowered. She kept her breath even. She did not look at Gideon until she reached his chair and felt the small stillness that came over him whenever she drew near. It was dangerous, that stillness. The room had learned to listen for it. "Thank you, Miss Vale," he said quietly as she filled his glass. A servant thanked by name at a duke's table. Lady Honoria's knife paused against her plate. Lady Octavia's smile deepened. "How attentive your grace is to household names," she said. Gideon did not look away from the wineglass. "A household is better governed when those inside it are not treated as furniture." Sir Peregrine gave a polite cough. Lady Mowbray raised her brows. Marian moved on, before her face could betray the shameful warmth that answer had lit in her chest. The first course passed, then the second. Conversation wandered through harvest prospects, London gossip, the last concert in York, and whether the roads south would remain tolerable after more rain. The words were ordinary. The air beneath them was not. Marian felt Lady Octavia watching her each time she crossed behind the chairs. She felt Lady Honoria waiting. At last, during the remove, when the servants carried away one arrangement and brought in the next, Lady Octavia lifted her glass and let candlelight catch the bracelet at her wrist. "Your Grace," she said, with a little laugh that made every head incline toward her, "I must ask forgiveness for my curiosity. Mamma tells me it is my worst fault." Lady Mowbray smiled. "Only because your curiosity is so often correct, my dear." Gideon's expression remained unchanged. "Curiosity is not a fault unless it forgets mercy. Then I shall be merciful." Lady Octavia's eyes drifted to Marian, who stood with a dish at the sideboard. "I only wondered whether the little ring your maid wears has been identified." Lady Honoria mentioned that it resembles a keepsake once belonging to the late Duchess of Alder-mere. Silence did not fall at once. It gathered, swift and cold. Marian did not move. Gideon set down his glass. "That matter is private." "Is it?" Lady Honoria said. "A Harcourt family possession appearing upon a servant's hand during a house party is not private, Gideon." "It is unfortunate." Marian felt the servants around her grow motionless. Mrs. Sloane stood near the door with her hands folded, her face composed and hungry. Gideon's voice lowered. "No accusation will be made in my dining room." Lady Honoria looked at Marian as if he had not spoken. "Girl, hold out your hand." Gideon rose. The movement was not loud, but every guest stiffened. "No." Lady Octavia's eyes widened with exquisite distress. "Your Grace, surely Lady Honoria only wishes to prevent misunderstanding. If Miss Vale came by the ring honestly, she can't object." Marian heard the trap click into place. If she refused, she looked guilty. If she obeyed, she surrendered the one object that had carried her name through years when no one else had cared to keep it. Mr. Anson took one step forward, then stopped when Gideon lifted a hand. "Miss Vale," Gideon said, and his voice had changed. It was still gentle, but strained at the edges. "You are not required to answer them." Lady Honoria's laugh was soft. "How gallant." "But the ring was your mother's, Gideon. Even you cannot deny the resemblance." The word mother did what Lady Honoria intended. Marian saw it. A small tightening at Gideon's mouth. A flicker of old grief crossing his eyes before discipline covered it. Lady Octavia leaned in with the appearance of compassion. No one wishes to harm the girl. We only wish to know whether she understands what she wears. Marian placed the dish in her hands back upon the sideboard. She turned, curtsied, and faced the table. Her voice was quiet, but the room heard it because everyone wished to hear her fail. I understand that it was given to me. Lady Honoria's eyes narrowed. By whom? Marian looked at Gideon then. He had told her, under the apple trees, that he would not make her bear truth alone. But he was standing now between his mother's memory and a maid's word, while half the county watched him choose. By a boy who had nothing else to give, she said. The words entered the room like a draught through a sealed window. One of the Ashbourne sisters pressed a hand to her throat. Sir Peregrine looked at the table. Lady Mowbray's face sharpened with disdain. Lady Octavia whispered, "How touching." Lady Honoria did not bother to soften her voice. This is absurd. A servant repeats a sentimental tale and expects us to ignore the theft of a Harcourt jewel. Gideon's hand closed on the back of his chair. Enough. No, Lady Honoria said. Not enough. The girl should be dismissed tonight. Her trunk should be searched. The ring should be returned to the family until the matter is resolved. Marian felt the whole structure of rank lean toward her. Not because the ring mattered so greatly, but because she had dared to possess something no one could explain without making room for her humanity. Gideon looked at the ring, then at Marian. His eyes held pain, apology, and one fatal hesitation. She saw him remember his mother. She saw him remember the cut ledger. She saw him realize that every person in the room would judge him not merely for kindness, but for whether he could govern his own house. No trunk will be searched, he said at last. Relief touched Marian, brief as candle flame, then he continued. But the ring should be placed in my keeping until its history is verified. The relief died. No one else would have heard the wound in that sentence. It was reasonable. It was measured. It protected her from a search and silenced the worst of the room. It also asked her to surrender the only proof she had carried when proof had been denied her. Marian stood very straight. Gideon seemed to know at once what he had done, but the words were already in the air, and Lady Honoria's satisfaction had already appeared. A wise decision, his aunt said. Lady Octavia looked down to hide her smile. Marian reached for the glove on her right hand. Her fingers were steady. That was the mercy pride gave when the heart could not. She drew the glove off, slowly. The ring caught the candlelight for the second time in that dining room. But now there was no wonder in the silence, only appetite. She slid the silver band from her finger. It resisted at the knuckle, as if the years themselves objected. For one terrible second, she thought she might not be able to remove it. Then it came free. Her hand felt naked at once. She crossed the few feet to the table and placed the ring beside Gideon's untouched wineglass. She did not look at Lady Honoria. She did not look at Lady Octavia. She looked only at the man who had once promised not to forget, and had now, in the politest possible way, asked her to prove she deserved to be remembered. Then it was never mine, Marian said. Gideon's face changed. Marian. The name was too late, she curtsied. May I return to my duties, Your Grace? Miss Vale, he said, lower now, wait. But to refuse before guests would create another scene, and both of them knew she had been scenes enough for one night. Mr. Anson stepped forward, his face grave. Miss Vale, you may withdraw. Marian turned and left, with the empty dignity of a woman carrying no tray, no ring, and no illusion that protection without trust could save her. She heard the dining room remain silent behind her until the door closed. Below stairs, the servants parted when she entered, as if disgrace might stain by nearness. Mrs. Sloane came in minutes later and said nothing at all. That was worse than triumph. Marian worked until the last plate was washed, until the last lamp was trimmed, until the house settled into the heavy sleep of people certain that servants did not suffer loudly enough to disturb them. Near 3 o'clock, she opened her narrow trunk. She did not take the ribbon from her childhood. She did not take the extra apron Mrs. Sloane would count. She took the wages owed from the small tin box beneath her stockings, a plain cloak, the old prayer book, with the address she had copied from the chapel letter, and one spare pair of gloves. Her right hand looked strange without the ring, lighter, empty. She stood a moment in the servants' corridor, listening to the old house breathe through its walls. Somewhere above, Gideon Harcourt kept her ring for verification. Somewhere ahead, in Belwick, an old woman might remember why Marian Vale had once been Mara, and why someone had cut her life from a ledger. Marian tied her cloak beneath her chin and opened the side door before dawn. The morning was cold. The road south waited in grey silence. She stepped onto it alone. Dawn had not yet broken when Marian reached the first turn of the south road, and Alder-mere Hall disappeared behind a rise of wet grass, as if the house had chosen to forget her before the day began. She did not look back. Looking back belonged to women who expected someone to call after them, and Marian had learned long ago that hope could be more dangerous than hunger. The air was cold enough to sting through her gloves, and the road to the coaching inn lay nearly 4 miles from the estate gate. Her cloak was plain, her shoes were serviceable but thin, and the small bundle beneath her arm held everything she had decided was truly hers. Not the ring, not the room she had slept in, not the wages Mrs. Sloane might later claim were improperly taken, though Marian had counted only what was owed and left the ledger note folded beneath her pillow. She carried the old prayer book instead. Between its pages, in a hand steadier than she had felt while writing it, she had copied the name from the chapel letter. Mrs. Elspeth Carden, Belwick Parish, 30 miles south by road. 30 miles was not impossibility, it was only distance, and distance could be crossed if one kept walking before fear learned to speak. A farm cart passed her after sunrise, and the driver, a red-faced man with straw on his coat, slowed when he saw a woman alone. "You headed toward Lanton," he called. Marian gathered her cloak tighter. "Only as far as the inn, sir. I've room beside the sacks, if you don't mind potatoes for company." She hesitated just long enough to measure risk against need. His wife sat beside him under a shawl, round and silent, knitting with stern concentration. That decided it. Marian climbed up with a word of thanks and rode the next 3 miles beside burlap sacks and the smell of damp earth. The farmer asked no questions beyond whether she had family ahead. "I hope so," Marian answered, because truth had many shades when spoken to strangers. At the inn, she paid for a place on the southbound coach with coins that had taken months to save. The clerk looked at her dress, then at her hands, then at the absence of a box or proper luggage. "Service?" he asked. "Not now," Marian said. He shrugged and marked her down without a title. The coach smelled of leather, wool, and rain. Marian took the rear seat beside a widow carrying a basket of eggs and kept the prayer book in both hands as the road jolted beneath them. With every mile, Alder-mere became less a place than a wound she had refused to let close falsely. She did not tell herself Gideon would come. She did not tell herself he would understand why she left. Understanding was a luxury granted by people who had time to consider another person's pain. Marian had work to do. If Mrs. Carden remembered the winter at St. Jude's, then Marian would no longer be a maid with a tail, a ring, and a duke's troubled conscience. She would have a name that could stand upright. By midday, the road narrowed between hedges, and a sharp rain began, not heavy enough to stop the coach, but cold enough to creep under Marian's collar. The widow beside her offered half a heel of bread without comment. Marian accepted it after one refusal, then forced herself to eat slowly. Pride did not warm the body. Food did. When the coach stopped at a smaller posting yard 10 miles from Belwick, Marian stepped down to stretch her legs and nearly stumbled. The widow touched her sleeve. "You've been walking before riding." Marian gave a faint smile. "Only a little. That's what tired girls say when they mean too much." The kindness was plain and brief. It hurt. Marian thanked her and climbed back in. As the coach moved again, she opened the prayer book to the copied address. Beneath it, she had written one sentence in the margin before leaving Alder-mere. "I will not be made guilty for remembering." She read it once, then closed the book before tears could make the ink blur. At Alder-mere Hall, The discovery of Marian's absence began not with alarm, but with irritation. Mrs. Sloane sent Bess to wake her for morning duties, and Bess returned pale, holding the folded note Marian had left. The housekeeper read it in the servants' hall, while every cup and spoon went still. Wages owed taken, no property of the house removed. Marian Vale. Mrs. Sloane's face hardened with a satisfaction too swift to be natural. No property removed? We shall see, Mr. Anson entered before she could give the order. His Grace is to be informed first. His Grace need not be disturbed by a maid who has chosen to prove her guilt. His Grace gave instructions concerning Miss Vale. Mrs. Sloane's keys struck her skirt as she turned, and I have responsibility concerning theft. She went to Marian's small room with 2 maids, a footman and Mr. Anson following at enough distance to witness without endorsing. The trunk sat unlocked beneath the narrow bed. Inside were 2 aprons, 1 worn shawl, a cracked comb, a ribbon faded almost white, and a small cloth bundle Marian had not taken because sentiment required space she could not spare. Mrs. Sloane lifted the aprons, shook the shawl, and gave a thin sound of triumph when a blue velvet pouch dropped from beneath the lining. Bess gasped. Mr. Anson's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Sloane opened the pouch and poured a pearl brooch into her palm. Lady Octavia's, she said. I saw it on her dressing table yesterday. No one spoke. The brooch lay bright and damning against the housekeeper's black glove. How fortunate, Mr. Anson said quietly, that you knew precisely where to look. Mrs. Sloane looked up. Are you accusing me? I am observing timing. Then observe this to His Grace. She swept from the room with the brooch held like a verdict. Gideon had not slept. He had spent the hours after dinner in his study, with the ring on the desk before him, its small circle of silver accusing him, more thoroughly than any person in the house could have done. He had told himself he had protected Marian from a search. He had told himself the ring would be safer in his keeping. By dawn, every explanation sounded like cowardice dressed in reason. When Mrs. Sloane arrived with the brooch, Lady Honoria and Lady Octavia were already in the morning room, both dressed as if expectation had woken them early. Gideon stood by the window, the ring closed in his hand. Miss Vale is gone, Mrs. Sloane announced, and this was found in her trunk. Lady Octavia placed a hand to her throat. My brooch. The performance was flawless, too flawless. Gideon looked at the pearl brooch, then at Lady Octavia. When did you last see it? Yesterday evening before dinner. I thought I had misplaced it. And you did not mention that. Lady Octavia's eyes widened. I didn't wish to create more unpleasantness. Lady Honoria's voice was cool. Your hesitation is admirable, my dear. Unfortunately, the girl's behavior has now answered every question. Gideon turned to Mrs. Sloane. Who found it? I did, Your Grace. Where in her trunk? A pause. A shawl. Which shawl? Mrs. Sloane faltered. A brown one, Your Grace. Gideon walked to the bell and rang once. When Mr. Anson appeared, Gideon said, Bring Miss Vale's trunk here as it was found, everything in it. Mrs. Sloane stiffened. Your Grace, surely that is unnecessary. It is necessary because I have begun to distrust convenient discoveries. Lady Honoria rose. Gideon. Sit down, Aunt. The words were quiet. They landed with force. Lady Honoria did not sit, but she did not speak again. Within minutes, Mr. Anson returned with the trunk, and the few poor things Marian had left behind. Gideon examined them without touching more than needed. 2 aprons, worn from honest use, a comb with missing teeth, a ribbon, a folded scrap in Marian's hand, noting wages owed and taken. No sign of haste beyond necessity. No stolen silver, no jewels, nothing that belonged to Alder-mere except the accusation people had placed upon her. Mr. Had Gideon said, was the trunk locked when Miss Vale left? No, Your Grace. Could anyone have entered the room? Several, Your Grace. Gideon looked at Mrs. Sloane. Including you. The housekeeper's lips parted. I serve this house, so did she. Silence filled the room. Lady Octavia's color rose. Your Grace, do you truly suggest I would place my own brooch in a maid's trunk? I suggest nothing yet. I am asking why every piece of evidence against Miss Vale appears only after someone has failed to take the ring from her hand. Lady Honoria's cane struck the floor. "This sentiment will ruin you." Gideon opened his hand. The silver ring lay against his palm. "No. This is what sentiment looks like after it has been mishandled by fear." He turned to Mr. Anson. "No servant is to repeat any accusation against Miss Vale. Anyone who does will answer to me. Send men to the South Road, the Lantern Inn, and the Belwick coach line, quietly. If she is found, she is not to be dragged back. She is to be told I wish to speak with her, and that she may refuse." Mr. Anson bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Gideon looked once more at the brooch. "And lock that away. Not as proof against Marian Vale, as proof that someone in this house believes lies can be planted like flowers and admired for their bloom." Hours later, as Marian stepped down from the coach at Belwick beneath a sky the color of pewter, she had no knowledge that Alder-mere Hall had begun turning against itself. She knew only that her feet ached, her stomach was empty, and the vicarage stood half a mile beyond the parish church, where someone might know whether Mrs. Elspeth Carden still lived. She crossed the small market square, with her cloak drawn close, and her prayer book pressed to her ribs. At the church gate, an old woman selling lavender bundles looked at her face, then at the book. "You seek someone, miss." Marian stopped. "Mrs. Carden." The woman's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition mixed with caution. "Then mind what you ask." "Old sins don't stay buried because gentlefolk wish them so." Marian's heart began to pound. "Where is she?" The woman pointed toward a narrow lane behind the church. "Last cottage before the mill stream." Marian thanked her and turned down the lane. With every step, the stolen ring, the planted brooch, and Gideon's wounded hesitation fell farther behind. Ahead was a door, an old matron, and the first person who might tell Marian whether her life had been lost by accident or taken by design, Mrs. Elspeth Carden's cottage stood at the end of the lane, with its thatch dark from rain and its small windows clouded by age, as if even the glass had learned to keep secrets. Marian stopped at the gate and pressed one hand against the latch, not because the latch was difficult, but because the girl who had survived St. Jude's was subtly closer than the woman who had crossed 30 miles to find her. The mill stream moved behind the cottage with a low, steady sound. Somewhere beyond the churchyard, a bell struck 4. She had imagined this moment during the coach ride with foolish clarity. She would knock. The old matron would open. The truth would step into daylight, as if truth had only been waiting politely for permission. Instead, Marian stood with wet shoes, an empty stomach, and no ring on her hand, realizing that a life could be stolen in minutes and require years of courage to reclaim. She knocked before fear could instruct her. A long pause followed. Then the door opened the width of a hand. An old woman looked out, narrow-faced and wrapped in a brown shawl, her white hair tucked beneath a cap. Her eyes were not vague with age. They were sharp with memory and suspicion. "I buy nothing," she said. Marian drew herself upright. "Mrs. Carden?" The old woman's fingers tightened on the door. "Who asks?" Marian swallowed. "Marian Vale. No recognition, only caution." Marian reached into her prayer book and drew out the copied note. "At St. Jude's I may have been called Mara." The door moved. "Not open, not closed, Mrs. Carden stared at her for so long that Marian heard the stream strike stones behind the cottage. "Mara," the old woman said at last, and the name sounded older than either of them. "Lord preserve us." Marian's breath caught. "You remember me?" "I remember too much." Mrs. Carden looked toward the lane, then pulled the door wider. "Come in before the church wall learns your business." The cottage was small, clean, and poor in a manner that did not apologize. A kettle sat on the hearth. A Bible lay open beside a pair of spectacles. Marian stood near the door, uncertain whether to sit, until Mrs. Carden pointed to a wooden chair. "You were a thin little thing," the matron said. "Dark hair. Too proud. Always giving away half your bread and then pretending you weren't hungry." Marian sat slowly. "And the boy?" Mrs. Carden closed her eyes for one breath. "The boy was never to be spoken of. Gideon Dell. That was the name given to us." "Who gave it?" Mrs. Carden rubbed one hand over the edge of her shawl. "A gentleman came first. Then a lady in black. She carried herself like a person accustomed to being obeyed, even by doors. Marian's fingers tightened around the prayer book. Lady Honoria Harcourt. The old woman did not deny it. That was answer enough. She said the boy was in danger from claimants and cousins and greedy men who would make a political matter out of a child's grief. We were told to shelter him quietly. The late Duchess had supported St. Jude's, so we obeyed. It seemed mercy at the time. And me, Mrs. Carden opened her eyes. Regret had made them bright. You were Reverend Vale's daughter. Your father had died owing more hope than money, but you were not born for service. There were letters asking whether some respectable household might take you as a pupil companion. You read well. You had manners when you chose to use them. Marian almost smiled, and almost broke. What happened? The old woman looked toward the window. The boy gave you the ring before they took him away. I saw it after. You would not surrender it, Lady Honoria was told. She came back within the week. The cottage seemed to tighten around Marian. What did she say? That a future duke could not have childish attachments to charity girls. That if you stayed in any place where your name could be traced, foolish people might one day make mischief. She arranged a position, paid for your transfer. Paid me for silence, Mrs. Carden's mouth trembled once. I told myself you would be fed. I told myself work was better than the streets. There are many sins hidden beneath sensible words. Marian looked down at her bare finger. You cut the ledger page. No. The answer came sharp. I was cowardly, but I did not do that. The page was taken after I left the main office. I kept copies because I did not trust gentlefolk who speak of charity with cold eyes. She rose with effort and crossed to a small chest beneath the window. Her hands shook as she unlocked it. From inside, she took a packet wrapped in linen and tied with string. I kept these when I retired. I thought perhaps one day God would ask me what I had done with the truth. She placed the packet on the table, but kept her hand over it. If I give you this, she will know. She already knows enough to be afraid, Marian said. Mrs. Carden studied her. You speak like your father. The words entered Marian so quietly that she could not defend against them. Did you know him? Only through his letters. Reverend Thomas Vale. Hampshire-born, gentle, stubborn, too trusting of relatives. He wrote asking that his daughter be educated, not buried. He called you Marian, but said you had named yourself Mara because Marian sounded too solemn for a girl who climbed orchard walls. A small sound escaped Marian before she could stop it. Half laugh, half grief. Then hoofbeats sounded in the lane. Mrs. Carden snatched the packet back. Someone has followed you. Marian rose, but the door opened before panic could settle. Gideon stood at the threshold in a plain traveling coat, darkened by rain, his hat in one hand, his face pale with haste and restraint. He looked nothing like the master of Alder-mere Hall. He looked like a man who had ridden too far on a heart already bruised by regret. Mrs. Carden, he said, I beg your pardon. I would not intrude if the matter could wait. Marian stepped between him and the table, before she could think better of it. How did you find me? His eyes moved to her, and the relief in them was so raw that she looked away. The coach line. The lavender cellar by the church. I came alone. No servants. One groom at the inn. He will not come here. Mrs. Carden stared at him. Gideon Dell. He flinched at the name. Then he bowed to her, not as a duke accepting homage, but as a man standing before one of the few witnesses to his weakness. Yes, the old woman sank into her chair. You were smaller then, so were my excuses. Marian heard the change in his voice, and disliked the way it reached her. Gideon turned to her fully. Before anything else, I owe you an apology. Your Grace, this is not the place. It is the only place. I asked you to surrender the ring in front of those who doubted you. I told myself it was protection. It was not. It was fear wearing a better coat. Marian's throat tightened. You stopped them from searching me, and still asked you to prove what I should have trusted enough to defend differently. She folded her hands. An apology does not restore what was taken. No, he said. It doesn't. I am not asking it to, Mrs. Carden watched them both with the stillness of an old woman who had seen children become the shape of their wounds. Gideon looked at the packet on the table. "Are those the copies, Mrs.?" Carden's hand trembled over the linen. "If I give them, Lady Honoria will ruin what is left of my peace. She will not. You are a duke." "You say that as if the world obeys cleanly," Marian said. "It rarely does." Gideon accepted the rebuke again, but his gaze remained steady. "Then, I will do more than say it. You will have my written protection, my solicitor's witness, and the vicar's confirmation before nightfall. If you choose to testify, you will not stand alone. If you choose not to, I will still protect you." The old woman studied him for a long moment. "You sound like your mother." At that his face changed. Mrs. Carden untied the packet. Inside lay several pages, browned at the edges, but legible. A copied baptismal note. Marian Vale, daughter of Reverend Thomas Vale and Anne Vale, deceased. A placement memorandum. A pension record marked with the initials HH. A brief note stating that the girl known as Mara was to be removed from St. Jude's after forming an unsuitable attachment to the boy sheltered as Gideon Dell. Marian read the baptismal note first. Her name did not tremble on the page. It stood there, inked and stubborn, as if it had been waiting years to remind her that she had not invented herself. Gideon did not reach for her. He only stood beside the table, hands closed at his sides, letting the truth belong to her before it became evidence for him. "Marian," he said softly. She looked up. "Do not say you're sorry again. I won't. Do not say you will fix everything. I won't say that either. Then what will you say?" He took a breath. "That I do not want obedience from you. I want the right to earn your trust, and I understand if that right is refused." The room became very quiet. Outside, the mill stream moved on, indifferent to dukes and maids and old sins finally given names. Marian gathered the copied baptismal note with careful fingers. She had thought proof would make her feel stronger. Instead, it made her feel young, as if the girl called Mara had stepped out from behind a door and was asking why Marian had left her alone so long. Gideon turned to Mrs. Carden. "May Miss Vale stay at the vicarage tonight?" "Mrs. Bell, the vicar's wife, is kind," the old woman said. "Cautious but kind." "Then I will ask properly," Gideon said. Not command. Marian heard the distinction. It mattered more than she wished it did. When they left the cottage, Mrs. Carden kept the originals but gave Marian the copied baptismal note, and Gideon the pension record. The lane was wet, and the sky had begun to clear over the church tower. Gideon walked beside Marian, close enough to shield her from passing carts, not close enough to claim her arm. Twice, he seemed to want to offer it. Twice, he stopped himself. At the vicarage gate, Marian paused. "I have not forgiven you. I know. I may not do so soon. I know that too." She looked at him then, at the man who had come without carriage, display, without household witnesses, without the authority he could have used like a wall. "But you may walk beside me to the door." His expression softened, not with triumph, but gratitude too deep to speak. Together they crossed the small path to the vicarage, Marian holding her own name in her hand, Gideon carrying the first proof of his aunt's betrayal in his coat, and neither of them, yet knowing, whether truth would save them or demand, more than either, was ready to pay. The vicarage parlour smelled of lavender, ink, and old wood smoke, and Marian sat beside the window with her copied baptismal note folded in her lap, as if the paper might vanish if she trusted it too openly. Mrs. Bell, the vicar's wife, had given her tea, dry stockings, and the sort of kindness that did not ask questions before offering a chair. That alone nearly undid her. Gideon stood near the hearth, not because the room required his authority, but because he seemed uncertain where a duke might stand without crowding a woman who had every reason to mistrust him. The pension record lay on the small table between them, HH. The initials looked harmless until one knew how much harm could hide inside two letters. "Mrs. Carden will speak if she is protected," Gideon said. "The vicar has agreed to witness her statement. My solicitor can be summoned from York by tomorrow afternoon." Marian looked down at her own name on the copied baptismal note. Marian Vale, daughter of Reverend Thomas Vale. The words should have made her whole. Instead, they had opened a room of grief she had never been allowed to enter. You say summoned as if truth travels at the pace of your horses. In my world it often does. His mouth tightened. That is not a virtue. She heard the self-rebuke, but she was too tired to soothe it. What do you intend to do? Return to Alder-mere with proof. Confront my aunt. Clear your name before the house. My name is already clear to me. He bowed his head slightly. Yes, I meant before those who stained it. They will say Mrs. Carden is old. They will say papers can be mistaken. They will say a maid learned just enough to deceive a grieving man. Then I will answer them. No. The word came before fear could soften it. Gideon looked up. Marian rose, the baptismal note held tightly in one hand. You will not answer everything for me. If I return as a witness to my own life, not as a rescued servant hidden behind your title. His eyes changed. The words had struck him, but not in anger. Then that is how you will return. And if I refuse, then I will still clear your name as far as I can. Without bringing me back, without bringing you back. The answer was immediate. It should have comforted her. Instead, it made the next silence more dangerous. He took something from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. The silver ring. Marian's breath caught before she could prevent it. The ring looked smaller here than it had in the dining room, no longer a spectacle beneath chandeliers. Only a worn circle of metal lying beside evidence of a stolen childhood. It should never have left your hand, he said. I cannot undo that. I can only return it. Marian did not reach for it. Did you verify it? Pain crossed his face. Yes, it was my mother's. And it was mine to give that winter, though I did not understand its value in gold. I understood only what it meant to me. And what did it mean? That someone I loved had existed. That I had not dreamed her warmth into being because I needed it. Marian's fingers tightened. Then you gave me grief, and called it a promise. Yes, the honesty startled her. And you kept it when I had no right to ask that of you. You were a child. So were you. I am not a child now. His voice lowered. Marian, come back to Alder-mere as you choose. Stand as witness if you choose. Leave afterward if you choose. But do not believe for another hour that I think of you as a thief. She looked at the ring until the room blurred, then forced the world clear again. Belief came late, too late. Do not agree with me so easily. I am not agreeing. I am admitting. That should not have touched her. It did. Gideon stepped no closer. There is something else I must say badly, because silence would be worse. Her heart seemed to stop first, then resume too quickly. Your Grace, I know. A faint, almost broken smile moved and vanished. That is the wrong beginning. He drew a breath. Marian, I asked you once as a boy who thought marriage was a way to keep from losing the only person who had been kind to him. I cannot pretend that memory has no hold over me. It does. But what I feel now is not only memory. The room seemed suddenly too small. Mrs. Bell's footsteps moved somewhere beyond the door, safely distant. But Marian felt exposed all the same. Gideon continued, careful and unsteady. When you stood in my dining room and surrendered the ring, rather than surrender your dignity, I saw the woman I had failed. When you left, I understood that protection without trust is another cage. I am asking badly, and too soon, and perhaps from more guilt than I wish were in me. But if marriage would give you safety, name, protection from what my house has done, then I would offer it. Marian closed her eyes. There it was. The dream that had once warmed a starving girl offered at last, and it hurt Aud more than rejection. No, she said. He did not move. No, not like this. She opened her eyes. Not because a boy promised. Not because a man feels guilty. Not because a duke can repair a scandal by making a duchess of the woman harmed beneath his roof. If I accepted that, I would never know whether you chose me or merely the debt. Gideon's face had gone pale, but he did not defend himself. You are right. I do not want to be right. Her voice softened despite herself. I wanted to be foolish. For one moment, I wanted to say yes and let safety be enough. Why did you not? Because I have lived too long on what other people decided was enough for me. Silence settled gently this time, sorrowful but clean. Gideon picked up the ring and held it out on his open palm. Then take this without answer. No promise attached, no claim. It is yours because I gave it, and because you kept faith with yourself when I did not keep faith with you." Marian reached for it. Their fingers did not touch. She closed the ring in her hand, but she did not put it on. Gideon noticed. He understood. "I will ask again only if you know both of us are free," he said. Before she could answer, the vicar entered with an expression of grave discomfort and a folded newspaper in hand. "Your Grace, a courier brought this to the inn. It is from York, but the notice concerns Alder-mere." Gideon took it. Marian watched his eyes move across the print. Something in him became very still. "Read it," she said. He hesitated. "Read it." His voice was controlled when he began. "It states that society may soon expect an announcement of alliance between the Duke of Alder-mere and Lady Octavia Mowbray, with the approval of both families." Marian felt the words strike exactly where Lady Octavia had intended them to land, not the heart, the pride. "Both families," she repeated. "I gave no approval, but someone knew you were away from Alder-mere and thought absence could speak for you." Gideon folded the paper once, very carefully. "My aunt and Lady Octavia." Yes, Mrs. Bell appeared in the doorway, anxious but silent. Gideon turned to the vicar. "I need paper, ink, and a rider I can trust. 3 notices are to leave within the hour. 1 to the York paper denying any engagement, 1 to my solicitor, 1 to Mr. Anson instructing him that no announcement of my marriage intentions is to be received from anyone but me." The vicar nodded and withdrew at once. Marian studied Gideon's face. "You move quickly when your own name is taken." The words were not gentle. He accepted them. "Yes, I should have moved as quickly when yours was." That answer left her with no weapon ready. He went to the small writing desk and wrote standing, his hand swift and hard across the page. "No engagement exists between myself and Lady Octavia Mowbray. No person is authorized to suggest otherwise." He signed with the full weight of his title, then wrote to Mr. Anson in sharper terms. While he sanded the page, Mrs. Bell returned with a second folded packet. This came among Mrs. Carden's things. She thought His Grace should see it before deciding what to do next. The packet contained a letter in faded ink, written in the late Duchess's hand. Gideon read the first lines and went utterly silent. Marian stepped closer despite herself. "What is it?" His voice roughened. "My mother knew." He placed the letter where Marian could see. The Duchess had written to St. Jude's after the winter of 1829, asking after the girl called Mara who had comforted her son. She described the ring and stated plainly that if the child still possessed it, she was not to be accused. It had been given in distress, but not stolen. Marian read the words once, then again. Not stolen. The late Duchess, dead before Marian could ever thank her, had defended a child against an accusation that had taken nearly 20 years to bloom. Gideon looked at her. "This ends the theft lie." "No," Marian said quietly. "It wounds it. Lies like that do not die until they are made ashamed in front of the people who fed them." Something like grim respect entered his face. "Then we return, as witnesses," she said. "As witnesses. And after," he looked at the ring in her closed hand. "After, you decide where you go, what you are called, and whether I have any place near either." Marian slipped the ring into the pocket of her dress. "Not on her finger, not yet. Then I will return to Alder-mere." By dawn the next morning, the notices had gone ahead. Mrs. Carden's statement was secured, and Marian stepped into the hired carriage with her baptismal copy, the Duchess's letter, and the ring hidden near her heart. Gideon sat opposite her, leaving the space between them untouched. Neither spoke as Belwick fell behind. Ahead waited Alder-mere Hall, Lady Honoria's false triumph, Lady Octavia's borrowed future, and a house that would soon be forced to hear the name Marian Vale without lowering it to a whisper. Alder-mere Hall did not receive Marian quietly. It had the strange stillness of a house that had been warned to prepare for ceremony, but not told whether the ceremony would be wedding, mourning, or trial. The carriage stopped before the front steps near noon, and Marian saw at once that Gideon had chosen the main entrance deliberately. Not the side door where servants slipped in with parcels. Not the kitchen court, where she had once carried coal scuttles and laundry baskets. The the front steps, the carved doors, the stone lions. The same entrance through which Lady Octavia had arrived with trunks and expectation. Mr. Anson stood wing beneath the portico, his face grave, his coat immaculate. Behind him, 2 footmen opened the doors. Marian did not move until Gideon stepped down, then turned back, not offering his hand as command, only holding it where she might choose. She looked at that hand. She remembered the dining room, the ring on the table, and the word verification cutting more neatly than accusation. Then she stepped it down without taking it. Gideon accepted the refusal with a slight bow. That inside the great hall had been arranged with cruel elegance, though not by cruelty alone. Chairs had been placed for Lady Honoria, Lady Mowbray, Lady Octavia, the Ashbourne sisters, Sir Peregrine, the vicar, Mrs. Bell, and several local families already trapped by the house party's obligations. Senior servants stood along the west wall, not mingled with the guests but not hidden either. Mrs. Sloane stood among them, stiff as a black pin. Lady Honoria sat beneath the Harcourt arms, as if the carving itself belonged to her. Lady Octavia wore pale lavender and an expression of injured patience. For a breath, every eye went to Marian's plain travelling dress, her unadorned hair, her gloved hands, and the absence of a maid's apron. Lady Honoria spoke first. "So the runaway returns." Gideon's voice cut across the hall, controlled and clear. Miss Vale did not run from justice. She went to find it. A ripple moved through the room. Marian felt it touch her skin and pass. She had been looked at by rooms before. This time she would not shrink to make the looking easier for them. Gideon moved to the center of the hall, but not in front of her. Beside her, Mr. Anson placed a small table before them. On it lay the copied baptismal note, Mrs. Carden's signed statement, the pension record, the late Duchess's letter, Lady Octavia's pearl brooch, and the silver ring. The sight of it nearly stole Marian's breath, but she held herself steady. Lady Honoria looked at the table, then at Gideon. "You have gathered half the county to discuss servant gossip." "No," Gideon said. "I gathered the people who heard or carried the accusation. They will hear the correction with the same clarity." Lady Mowbray stiffened. "Your Grace, my daughter has been distressed enough." Then she will be relieved to have distress separated from falsehood. Lady Octavia lowered her eyes, wounded and perfect. "I only wish to protect your family from deception." Marian looked at her then. "So did I, my lady. That is why I came back." The hall quieted. Gideon turned to the vicar. "Mr. Bell, you witnessed Mrs. Carden's statement?" "I did, Your Grace, and you found her of sound mind." "I found her old, frightened, and perfectly clear." Gideon lifted the first page. "Mrs. Elspeth Carden was matron at St. Jude's in the winter of 1829. She confirms that I was sheltered there, briefly under the name Gideon Dell, after my parents' accident, while matters of guardianship were settled. She confirms that a girl called Mara, properly Marian Vale, daughter of Reverend Thomas Vale, was resident there. She confirms that I gave Marian this ring before I was removed." Lady Honoria gave a soft laugh. A sentimental memory from an old woman eager for relevance. Marian felt the old sting of being dismissed before her words could stand. Gideon did not answer for her. He looked at her. The choice was hers. Marian stepped forward. "Mrs. Carden remembered that I cut my hair unevenly because another girl had put gum in it. She remembered that I hid bread in the hem of my blanket. She remembered that I called the boy Gideon Dell proud because he would rather faint than admit he was hungry. Those are not useful lies, Lady Honoria. They are useless truths. That is why I trust them." Several faces turned away, embarrassed by the intimacy of poverty. Gideon's eyes remained steady on her, and there was no pity in them, only respect. He lifted the baptismal note. "This confirms Marian Vale's parentage. Reverend Thomas Vale was not a fiction." He placed down the paper and took up the pension record. "This shows payments made to Mrs. Carden after Marian's removal. The initials recorded are HH. Lady Honoria's face did not change, but her hand closed over the head of her cane. Many people bear initials. Few of them managed this house while deciding which traces of Marian Vale should disappear." Gideon lifted the next page. Mrs. Carden states that you came to St. Jude's veiled in black and arranged Marian's transfer after learning of the ring. Lady Honoria rose. I arranged nothing improper. I protected you. You were a grieving heir, vulnerable to stories, servants, charity children, and every form of manipulation. That girl had already learned to fasten herself to you. Marian's chest tightened, but her voice stayed calm. I was 12 years old enough to keep what did not belong to you. Gideon picked up the Duchess's letter. The hall seemed to lean toward it. My mother wrote to St. Jude's after that winter. Her letter identifies the ring. It states that if the girl still possessed it, she was not to be accused. It had been given, not stolen. Lady Honoria's composure cracked for the first time. Not much, enough. Lady Octavia's gaze darted toward her mother. Gideon laid the letter down. The theft accusation is ended. Mrs. Sloane spoke from the servants' line too quickly. Your Grace, the brooch was still found in her trunk. Yes, Gideon said, after Miss Vale left, in an unlocked trunk, in a room entered by several servants. By your own account, you found it under a brown shawl. He turned to Mr. Anson. What did you find when you examined the trunk? The shawl was grey, Your Grace. There was no brown shawl in the trunk. Mrs. Sloane's mouth opened, then closed. A low stir passed along the servants' wall. Gideon looked at Lady Octavia. When did you misplace the brooch? I told you, I thought it lost. Before or after you wrote this? He took a folded note from Mr. Anson. Lady Octavia went white. Lady Mowbray reached for her daughter's hand. Gideon did not read the whole letter. He did not need to. Lady Octavia wrote to Lady Honoria the morning after the drawing-room confrontation. Relevant sentence reads, if the brooch appears where it must, even His Grace will have to see what sort of woman he has defended. Lady Octavia stood so quickly, her chair struck the floor behind her. It was never meant to go so far. Lady Mowbray whispered, Octavia. She was a maid, Lady Octavia said, and the sweetness dropped from her like torn lace. Everyone was staring at her. Everyone. He thanked her by name at dinner. He looked at her as though rank had become meaningless. Marian looked at the girl before her, beautiful, cornered, and smaller without polish. Rank was never meaningless to you, my lady. That was the trouble. Lady Honoria struck her cane once. You will not speak to a lady that way. Gideon turned to his aunt. She will speak in my hall when her name is being restored. The words settled heavily. Finally, publicly. Lady Honoria's face hardened into something almost cold enough to admire. You would shame your own blood for her. No, you did that without help. He faced the room. Lady Honoria Harcourt will leave Alder-mere before the week ends. Her allowance will be reduced to what duty requires and no more. She will have no authority over my household, my correspondence, my guests, or any charitable trust bearing the Harcourt name. Lady Honoria sat slowly, as if her bones had aged in 1 minute. Gideon turned to Lady Mowbray. Any discussion of an alliance between our families is ended. Lady Octavia's conduct will not be publicly advertised by me, provided no further word is spoken against Miss Vale. Lady Mowbray bowed her head, humiliated and grateful at once. Lady Octavia sat down without looking at anyone. Then Gideon faced Mrs. Sloane. You will leave service today. Mr. Anson will prepare wages owed. You will receive no character from Alder-mere, Mrs. Sloane's face collapsed into outrage. After 20 years? After 20 years, you should have known the difference between discipline and cruelty. No one spoke. The servants' wall seemed to breathe for the first time. Gideon turned to Marian, and his voice changed, not softer in volume, but stripped of command. Miss Vale, the accusation made in this house was false. The ring was given to you. Your name was hidden. Your place was altered by those who feared what your existence might mean. Before this household and these witnesses, I acknowledge Marian Vale, daughter of Reverend Thomas Vale, as an injured gentlewoman under my protection only so long as she chooses to accept it, and never as a servant to be silenced. Marian felt the room blur, but she would not weep for their comfort. She stepped to the table. The ring lay beside the Duchess's letter. For one heartbeat, she saw the dining room again, and her own hand placing it down in defeat. Then she picked it up. No one asked, no one commanded. She slid it onto her finger herself. The silver settled into its old place, and this time it did not feel like proof that someone else had remembered. It felt like proof that she had returned for herself. "I was called Mara when I was a child," she said. "I am Marian Vale. I served in this house honestly. I left it honestly. I return now not to beg place, pardon, or favor, but to say that a poor woman's truth is still truth before a duke believes it, before a lady permits it, and before a room knows what to do with it." The silence that followed was not the silence of contempt. It was the silence of people forced to rearrange the world by one woman's upright spine. Mr. Anson bowed first, not deeply, properly, then Mrs. Bell, then the vicar. One by one, others lowered their eyes or heads, not in worship, but in acknowledgement. Gideon did not touch Marian. He did not propose. He did not claim her victory as romance. He only stood beside her, while the hall that had nearly condemned her learned the shape of respect. When the gathering began to break apart, Lady Honoria remained beneath the Harcourt arms, pale with fury and defeat. Lady Octavia was led away by her mother. Mrs. Sloane's keys were removed by Mr. Anson and placed on the table with a sound that closed a chapter below stairs. Gideon turned to Marian when the last guests had moved toward the drawing room. "There is one more place," he said quietly. "The chapel. Not now, if you don't wish it. Not ever, if you don't wish it." Marian looked at the ring on her hand, then toward the corridor that led east. "The promise began hurting there," she said. "Perhaps it should end there too." Together, not touching, they left the great hall behind them, while the silver ring caught the afternoon light and Lady Honoria's power over Marian Vale ended where it had once begun, under the eyes of the very house that had tried to make her invisible. The corridor to the chapel felt longer than it had that morning, though Marian had walked it many times with linen in her arms and duty pressing her eyes toward the floor. Now she walked beside Gideon Harcourt, with the silver ring on her hand, and the whole house behind them altered by truth. No servant called after her, no lady ordered her to stop. The silence that followed them was not empty. It was full of endings. At the chapel door, Gideon paused and looked at her, as if even opening it without her consent might be another form of command. "May I?" he asked. Marian could have smiled at the carefulness of him, but the day had left too many tender places exposed. "Yes," he opened the door. Afternoon light fell through the narrow windows. Pale and slanting, touching the stone floor, the little altar, the worn pews, and the place near the vestry where the ledger had first shown its cut wound. The chapel smelled of wax, rain-damp stone, and old wood. No guests waited there, no servants lined the wall. Anson stood at the far threshold for propriety, then bowed and withdrew to a respectful distance outside, leaving the door open. Gideon did not lead Marian to the altar. He did not take her hand. He walked to the first pew and stopped where a man might pray if he had forgotten how to kneel. "I used to hate this chapel," he said. Marian looked at him. "Because of mourning. Because everyone praised me here for being quiet." His eyes moved to the Harcourt memorial plaques. "After my parents died, they sat me in front and called it dignity, when I had simply run out of ways to ask where my mother had gone." Marian felt the old anger in him, controlled but not buried. Children are often praised for suffering conveniently. "Yes," he turned back to her. "You did not suffer conveniently today." The faint warmth in his voice almost broke her composure. "I learned from the best houses how inconvenient truth could be, and I learned how easily a man can mistake command for care." He drew a breath. "Marian, before anything else, I want the promise put in its proper place." Her hand closed around the ring. "What place is that?" "The past." The word was gentle, but it struck hard. He stepped no closer. A boy made that vow, because he was afraid of losing the one person who had made him feel less alone. It was real. I will not dishonor it by calling it childish nonsense. But it was incomplete. It did not ask what you wanted. It did not understand rank, poverty, grief, or choice. It was a promise made by a child who had no power and no wisdom except love in its smallest, most desperate form. Marian looked down at the ring. I lived many years with that desperate form. I know. No, she said softly. You know more than before. That is not the same. He accepted the correction. You are right. For a moment neither spoke. The house beyond the chapel seemed very far away. Marian thought of the dining rooms, the side door at dawn, Belwick rain misses. Carden's shaking hand, the great hall lowering its eyes before her name. She had wanted proof. She had gained it. She had wanted the ring returned. It had been. Yet the ache remained, because justice could restore a name and still leave a heart uncertain where to stand. Gideon reached into his coat and took out a folded paper. This is not a proposal. Marian's breath caught despite the warning. Then what is it? A draft of a settlement, written before we returned, but not offered until now. If you choose never to marry me, it remains yours to accept or refuse. It restores funds that should have supported your education after your father's death. It secures independence enough for you to live with comfort, take a companion's place only if you wish, or establish the charity school you spoke of in Belwick, without depending on my favor. Marian stared at the paper as if it might be another trap disguised as rescue. You would give me this if I left Alder-mere tonight? Yes. Why? Because restitution should not require affection. The answer was so plain that she had to look away. And if I refuse it? Then I will ask how to repair what can be repaired in another manner. You make it difficult to distrust you. His face softened, but he did not smile. I deserve some difficulty. She took the paper, but did not open it. The weight of it mattered less than what he had said. No affection required, no vow demanded. No coronet placed over a wound and called healing. Lady Honoria will say you are making a scandal greater by honoring me. Lady Honoria no longer governs my conscience. Lady Octavia will say I trapped you. Lady Octavia has lost the privilege of defining truth. Society will say Maid Duchess behind their fans until the phrase grows teeth. Gideon's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. They may say it. I will not hide that you served in this house. I will not parade it either, as if pain becomes virtue only when displayed for dinner conversation. You were a maid. You were also a clergyman's daughter, a child wronged by my family, a woman of courage, and the only person in that hall who spoke without using rank as a shield. If society needs a smaller name for that, society may choke on its own laziness. Marian should have rebuked the sharpness. Instead, one soft breath of laughter escaped her. It startled them both. Gideon's expression changed, warmed by wonder and restraint. There, he said quietly. I have wanted to hear that sound without hurting you first. The laughter vanished into something far more fragile. Marian looked toward the altar. Do not make me into a victory. I will not. Do not love the girl from St. Jude's and call it loving me. I do love the girl from St. Jude's, he said, and the honesty made her chest tighten. But I love her as part of you, not instead of you. I love the woman who told a duke no. I love the woman who walked 30 miles toward truth, rather than remain safely doubted. I love the woman who put the ring back on her own finger when a room finally learned to listen. I love you in the present tense, Marian. Not as memory, not as debt. She closed her eyes. The words were not dramatic. They did not need to be. They entered quietly, like warmth, returning to a room long closed against winter. You said you would ask again when both of us were free, she whispered. Yes. Are you free? From my aunt's command, yes. From guilt, not completely. From memory, never. He paused. But I am free enough to know that guilt would accept your gratitude, while love wants your choice. She opened her eyes. And am I free? Only you can answer that. Marian looked at the open chapel door. Beyond it lay Alder-mere Hall, no longer the house that owned her labor yet. Not yet the home her heart could trust. She thought of the servants who had seen her accused. Bess's frightened kindness. Mr. Anson's bow. Mrs. Sloane's keys placed on the table. She thought of the girls who would come after her, orphaned, reduced, educated just enough to be punished for it. Freedom could not mean merely walking away. Sometimes it meant staying where one had been diminished, and changing the terms of the room. I am not free of fear, she said. I am not free of anger. I am not free of wondering whether every smile in drawing rooms will hide the word maid. Gideon's face remained steady. Then I will not ask for a fearless answer. But I am free of believing that what happened to me made me less. His breath caught. She saw it. A small break in the Duke, a great one in the man. Marian held out her hand, not the one with the ring, but the other. You may take my hand. He looked at it as if it were a sacrament. Are you certain? No, she said, and the truth made her smile faintly. But I'm willing. He took her hand with such care that no one watching would have mistaken it for possession. His palm was warm. His fingers trembled once, then steadied around hers. Marian Vale, he said, and the name sounded full in the chapel, unhidden and unashamed. Will you marry me? Not because I promised as a boy, not because my house owes you justice, not because the world has been cruel, but because I love you and wish to spend my life proving choice can be gentler than fate. She looked at him through tears she did not let fall. Ask me as Gideon. His eyes changed. The title fell away from him without a word. Marian, will you marry me? The answer that rose in her was not the old dream. It was stronger than dream because it had survived refusal, proof, anger, and truth. Yes, she said, I will. He bowed his head over her hand, not kissing it before the open door, not taking more than propriety allowed, but holding it as if the whole future had narrowed to the fragile honor of being trusted. Outside, a floorboard sounded. Mr. Anson shifted in the corridor and discreetly looked away. Marian did not pull back. There is one thing, she said. Gideon lifted his eyes. Anything. Not anything. That is too dangerous a promise. Then tell me one thing. The servants who watched me accused must not hear of my honor from gossip. They stood in that hall when I was shamed. They should stand in it when I am acknowledged. Gideon's expression deepened into something like pride, but he kept it quiet. Then they will, and not as spectacle, no, as correction. She nodded. The word pleased her. Correction, not revenge, not performance. The setting right of a crooked line. Gideon released her hand only when she gently withdrew it. Marian looked at the silver ring beside her plain glove and imagined, not without fear, another ring beside it. A wedding band. A chosen circle, not a chain. From beyond the chapel, the bells of Alder-mere Hall rang the hour. The sound no longer felt like command. It felt like witness. Together they turned toward the open door where the house waited, changed but not yet healed. And Marian walked beside Gideon not as a rescued maid, not as a secret from his childhood, but as the woman who had finally been asked and had freely answered. 6 months after the chapel vow, Alder-mere Hall opened its front doors for the estate homecoming dinner, and the house that had once watched Marian Vale carry trays now waited to receive her as its duchess. Nothing about the old stone had changed. The same portraits looked down from the walls. The same staircase curved beneath the painted ceiling. The same lamps burned along the gallery, casting gold across polished wood and marble. Yet Marian felt the difference before she crossed the threshold. It was not in the flowers, though the entrance hall was filled with winter greenery and white hothouse blooms. It was not in the footman's livery, or the silver warmed by candlelight. It was in the way silence made room for her. Gideon stood at her side, dressed in black evening clothes, his expression composed to anyone who did not know him. Marian knew him. She saw the careful watchfulness beneath the calm. He was not afraid she would falter. He was ready in case the house did. She wore deep green silk, simple in line, but beautifully made, with her dark hair pinned beneath a small arrangement of pearls that had belonged to his mother. On her left hand rested her wedding band. Beside it, worn silver caught the candlelight through one old scratch. Gideon had refused to polish away. That scratch had survived St. Jude's service, accusation, and return. Marian had kept it because some marks were not damage. Some were testimony. Mr. Anson stood before the assembled household at the foot of the stairs. He had grown no less formal in 6 months, though Marian had more than once seen him hide a smile when Bess, now promoted and much less afraid, forgot herself and spoke too quickly in the linen room. Behind him stood the senior servants, the footman, the maids, the kitchen staff, and several estate tenants invited to witness the new Duchess's first formal dinner at Alder-mere after the wedding journey. Mrs. Sloane was not among them. Her keys had passed first to Mr. Anson's temporary care, then to Mrs. Bell's widowed cousin, Mrs. Alder, who believed discipline and cruelty were not relations. Lady Honoria was not present either. She lived now in a small house near Bath, well furnished enough to satisfy duty, and quiet enough to satisfy justice. Her letters came rarely and received shorter replies. Lady Octavia had been taken abroad by her mother after the scandal, where beauty might still find admirers but not ignorance. No public pamphlet had ruined them. Gideon had kept his word. He had not advertised shame, but neither had he hidden truth where falsehood could feed again. Mr. Anson struck his staff once against the floor. The sound moved through the hall, clear and solemn. Her Grace, the Duchess of Alder-mere. Marian heard the title and felt, not triumph, but the weight of every corridor she had walked without it. For one breath she saw herself at the sideboard with sore hands and lowered eyes. Then Bess curtsied first. Not clumsily, not out of fear. Properly, with tears shining despite all effort. Others followed. The footman bowed. The maids curtsied. Mrs. Alder lowered her head with firm respect. The tenants' wives did the same. Marian did not imagine that all hearts had changed. Houses did not heal in one announcement, but acknowledgement had its own power. A name spoken correctly before witnesses could begin to mend what whispers had undone. Gideon leaned slightly nearer. "Are you well?" he asked. "I'm standing," Marian said softly. "That isn't what I asked." A small smile touched her mouth. "Then yes. I am well enough." He did not touch her there before the household. He knew now that restraint could be tenderness when it left a woman room to stand. Dinner followed in the great dining room, though the arrangement had changed by Marian's request. The senior household was not expected to dine with the guests, for society would not bend that far in. A single season, but each servant had received an extra day's wage, and a warm supper had been prepared below stairs, before the formal service began. Not after midnight, when exhaustion made gratitude difficult. In the old schoolroom off the West Wing, 6 orphaned girls and 3 daughters of reduced gentlewomen now studied reading, accounts, scripture, household management, and correspondence under Mrs. Bell's supervision. Marian had insisted they learn accounts first. Charity without numbers, she had said, too easily became dependence decorated with hymns. The settlement Gideon had drafted in Belwick had become the foundation for the Alder-mere school for girls of reduced circumstances. He had given funds. Marian had given shape. No girl there would be punished for reading too well. No child's name would be cut from a ledger without 3 copies kept in separate hands. At dinner, Sir Peregrine spoke too long about drainage ditches. The vicar praised the school with more emotion than grammar, and Mrs. Bell quietly passed Marian a note from Mrs. Carden, whose hand had grown shakier, but whose conscience had not. The note was brief. Saw the first girl write her name without fear. That is enough for one old woman. Marian folded it carefully and kept it in her reticule. Gideon saw but did not ask. Later, when the last guests had risen, and the household began its careful dance of clearing the table, Bess entered, carrying a tray of fresh candles. For a moment, Marian watched the girl step around the chairs with anxious concentration, and remembered what it had meant to be watched for mistakes by those who wanted to find them. "Bess," she said. The girl nearly dropped a candle, then curtsied. "Your Grace? After service, will you remind Mrs. Alder that the new linen inventory is to include the maid's own bedding first?" The guest rooms have had centuries of attention. A flicker of startled delight crossed Bess's face. "Yes, Your Grace." Marian let her go. Gideon's voice came quietly beside her. "You enjoy terrifying the Order of England one linen cupboard at a time. Someone must begin somewhere. I'm proud of you." She looked at him. "For linen? For remembering where power touches ordinary life." The words settled warmly. It had taken months for Marian to accept praise without searching for the hook beneath it. Gideon had never stopped offering it plainly. Love, she had learned, could be patient without being passive. It could stand near and not consume the air. It could apologize once, then spend a lifetime making the apology unnecessary to repeat. When the house finally quieted, Marian walked alone to the servants' passage that led toward the old silver room. Gideon did not follow until she looked back and invited him with a small movement of her hand. The room had been scrubbed, reorganized, and stripped of Mrs. Sloane's severity. No girl now worked there longer than rotation allowed. No punishment was disguised as polish. Marian stood before the table where her hands had once ached over candlesticks and looked at her rings. "I thought becoming a duchess would erase the maid," she said. Gideon stood at the door. "Did it?" "No." She turned her hand, letting the wedding band and the silver promise ring catch the same thin lamplight. It gave her witnesses. He crossed the room only when she held out her hand. This time, he took it without trembling, though always with care. She deserved them sooner. "Yes," Marian said. She did. No comfort was needed after that. Truth did not always require softening. Sometimes it asked only to be spoken and allowed to stand. They left the silver room together and crossed the quiet hall toward the chapel. It had become their habit, after difficult days, to end there, not because grief lived in the stones still, but because the stones had seen promise change its nature. The chapel door was unlocked. Inside, a few candles burned near the altar, and the winter dark pressed gently against the narrow windows. Marian walked to the first pew, where Gideon had once confessed he had hated being praised for silence. Now neither of them needed silence as armor. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Do you ever wish the ring had never found its way back?" he asked. Marian looked at the silver band. For years it had been proof that she had once mattered to someone. Then it had become accusation, then evidence, then choice. "No," she said. "But I am glad it is no longer the only proof." "Of what?" "That I was remembered." Gideon took her hand and turned it gently, so the old ring rested beside the wedding band. What is it proof of now? Marian thought of the hall. Bess's curtsy, Mrs. Carden's note, the girls writing their names in the schoolroom, and the front doors that had opened for her, without shame. "That I remembered myself," she said. Gideon bowed his head over her hand and kissed it softly, there in the chapel where propriety no longer felt like fear but reverence. "The boy made a promise," he said. "The man will keep choosing." Marian leaned her shoulder against his at last. Outside, Alder-mere Hall stood broad and quiet beneath the English night, no longer a place where she had been hidden, not entirely healed, but changed by truth, by correction, and by the woman who had entered first as a maid with a ring and remained as the duchess, who made sure no forgotten girl's name would ever again be easy to erase.